Hey, what's up, everybody?
Welcome back to Mile Higher Podcast, episode 203. Today, we have a very special guest on our show. We have Rae Andreacchio, who is the mother of Christian Andreacchio, and we are going to be talking about his case today on Mile Higher, which I'm surprised we've never covered it here, actually, because this case is very near and dear to our hearts. We've kind of experienced everyone in this case and the whole thing in person.
Well, we've immersed ourselves into the Andreacchio's world and really got just a real taste of what they've had to deal with ever since Christian's death, and just the fight for justice to try and figure out exactly what happened to their son.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that don't know, we did a vlogumentary is what we call it, basically like our version of a documentary called Apartment 801 on this case. It's the one and only documentary we've ever done, and it was with the Andreacchio family.
Yep.
We actually went down to Meridian, Mississippi, which is where they live and where Christian grew up, and filmed with them and spent almost a whole week with them.
Yeah, and it was a really special time for us. I mean, getting to experience a case like this in person just kind of changed our perspective on true crime in so many ways, and just working on this whole project was a real passion project for us. The documentary came out in 2020.
Yep.
And we've actually wanted to do more documentaries because we had such a great time working on it, but we all know it happened shortly after the beginning of 2020. So we haven't been able to do other projects, but we want to in the future because, like I said, it was just such a impactful experience. And Rae has been so inspirational to us. And we are so excited to have her here joining us today to tell you about
we thought it was
case.
only right that we bring her out here and actually talk with her about this in person again, and kind of revisit not only just the case in general, but where things are at now. I mean, it's been almost 2 years since we filmed that.
Yeah, well, we filmed it
2 years or so.
We filmed it in like fall of 2019.
Yeah, like November.
So going on 3.
2019. Yeah,
crazy. Time flies.
So we're going to catch up with her on what's happened since we left Mississippi, and are we any closer to hopefully getting some justice for Christian? And that's what we're going to talk to her about today. But before we get into it, I did want to just play our trailer for our documentary, because I watched it this morning, and it really helps set the tone for what this case is all about, and really gives you a great look into Rae, really, and what her experience has been like, and just sort of how hard this has all been.
All the tension in this community, how much.
Yes, this is a very. There is a lot of contention around this case, and a lot of animosity from the other side, and just it's a difficult one. It's a very difficult one.
It is. It's kind of turned this whole town upside down, you could say. It's been and really intense.
And while we were there, we discovered there's just so much more going on that even goes beyond just Christian's case. I mean, there's so many other cases that are impacted by the issues that are going on with the law enforcement, local government there, potentially corruption, just so many different issues that just plague this town. Yeah. And the Andreacchios have just been so brave in their fight against all of this and trying to right the wrongs that have been made, and they're not stopping. And I commend them for that, and just have that strength to keep on going and keep the fight going. So
our documentary is available on YouTube. It's in 2 parts, and we will have it linked below if you haven't seen it. But let's just watch this trailer.
Okay. Yeah, let's watch it.
When a parent loses a child, their world stops. It is the closest thing to experiencing your own death while still living and breathing. But you are living and breathing, and you do still have other children and other responsibilities, so you carry on. Time goes by and people move on to another tragedy or celebrate their own milestones. You continue to tread water, half of the time wishing you would drown, and the other half of the time feeling guilty that you don't. And time keeps going by. Time that can heal most wounds, but not all. They say when you have a child die that you join the club that no one wants to be a member of. When you have a child murdered, you become a member of a club that is much smaller and comes with its own unique challenges.
Christian. 911, where's your emergency? Man, we've had a suicide.
One challenge that I did not expect and should not have expected was the fight to find justice for my child. Prior to my son's death, I never had much interaction with law enforcement. I thought all was right with the world overall. Ironic enough, I voted for some of the people who later would betray me. I foolishly thought most people are inherently good and would do the right thing.
Wow. That just brought back.
Wait, it's not over yet.
Oh yeah.
Remember?
Right. I forgot.
So what's up? What do you have?
I need to speak with Dylan.
Well, you're not speaking with Dylan.
Lead me to him.
Absolutely not. It's so fucking funny.
It's not funny.
Tell us where to find him.
I'm not telling you
He
shit.
followed us from the apartments behind Hardy's all the way to Sonic.
Yeah.
Knocked on my car window, and
right, sweetie,
we've asked him to
take
go
care.
in a couple
Fuck
times.
you.
He has not.
Damn. I just got chills. Just a flood of memories just hit me.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
it gives me
I haven't
gives me
seen that in a long time.
full body chills just listening to Rae just talk there and just seeing all of those scenes and memories come back is just.
I mean, again, just being with a family in person.
In a fight, in like a full battle. I mean, this was, we weren't even fully prepared for what we were going into when we went down there. We had no idea just the level of.
Well, how can you from internet and from phone calls?
No.
I mean, once you're there in person and you're seeing it, that scene of us flipping that sign, that really got me. I forgot about that moment, actually. We were there for the election for DA, and it was so heated that the sign was actually flipped upside down by someone
some
on the
asshole
opposing side.
flipped it upside down.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a full out war.
It was. It was so intense. Gosh, got me like, my heart's like racing now just even thinking about it. It was so
It was a very intense experience, and just it really changed us permanently, and of how we look at true crime, and just like, this isn't just stories. This is not as hard as it is. Like, it's very difficult to do this job and cover cases week after week after week and not have the level of immersion that we have with the Andreacchio case, because you get connected to it physically, emotionally, and it's difficult. And that's why we want to do this again, because it's a totally different experience. And it really just, when you can immerse yourself into a victim's family's world, or just a family that's fighting for justice, it's just a whole nother level of emotions and experience that you can't. And even at that point, obviously, even just being immersed in it, you don't feel what the family feels, but it allows you to get
a better glimpse,
a little bit of what they experience on a day-to-day basis. And it's truly remarkable what the Andreacchios have gone through. And so I'm so excited to sit down with Rae and catch up with her and kind of go back over this case and see what's happened since we filmed this. So
she's amazing. Their whole family is amazing.
Absolutely. No, we love them. I mean, they're like, we've become friends.
Definitely.
Since we've done this. And so it's great to be able to see Rae again. So we will be back with her
momentarily. All right. So we have Rae Andreacchio in the studio with us today. Rae, it's so great to have you here.
It's good to be here.
And today we're going to be talking about the case kind of from a summary perspective, in a sense. And we want to go deep into some of this, but we do want to remind people that there is so much information out there in other sources as well. I mean, there's way too much that we can't pack it all into one episode, but don't let this be your only, insight into this case, because there is just so much going on and things are only continuing to ramp up, and, more information will be coming out in the future. Okay, so we are going to start with a little background about Christian for those of you who are not familiar with the case and who he was. So Christian Shane Andreacchio was born November 4th, 1992 in Meridian, Mississippi to his parents Rae and Todd. He had an older brother named Joshua and a sister named Alexa. Can you tell us a little bit about what Christian was like growing up?
Christian was very mischievous, hyperactive, always into something. A very good brother. He and Josh were very close, and I think until something happened, we didn't realize how close they were. And looking back, Todd and I sometimes say, they never got into a fight. We never remember them fussing or arguing, and I think their personalities were a good blend, a good mesh. Christian was more outgoing and more the life of the party, and Josh was more quiet and just kind of sat back and let Christian do his thing and would laugh at him and, kind of enjoy his company. And Alexa looked up to Christian. He was, again, kind of the center of her world. He took her places and was real good about doing things with her and, let her hang out sometimes with him and his friends when probably she shouldn't have been. But just a very outgoing kid who liked being around people, never met a stranger.
Mm-hmm. Loved his family.
Mm-hmm. Christian grew up, I would say, primarily out in the country. Before we didn't move to Delwood until he was probably 15, 16. Mm-hmm. And so he grew up, in pastures and riding the dirt bike and making jumps for the dirt bike and swinging over the creek and all that good stuff. And then we moved to Delwood, which is, I guess, a little community, a lake community outside of, it's about 10, 12 miles outside of Meridian. Mm-hmm. And which Meridian isn't a large city by any means. It's only about 40,000 people. But then Delwood's about 12 miles out. And it's a large lake. And there's, I don't know how many houses, but a couple hundred houses built around the lake.
Yeah. I mean, we went out there when we filmed the documentary. It's honestly a beautiful area as far as the nature goes, and the lake's real pretty, and was probably a lot of fun to, go out and ride jets. He liked to ride jet skis and boating and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of really good memories there with Christian. Yeah,
when we decided to move and build a house, we really moved there because of Christian and the kids. They wanted to be there. They wanted to be on the water. Yeah. And so it wasn't necessarily my ideal place because I like being out in the country where there's nobody around you.
Yeah.
Right. But you do things for your children. They wanted to live there and they wanted to be on the water. And so, they really enjoyed it there.
Yeah. He was out there like every morning, right?
Yeah. Christian loved being on the pontoon boat, the jet ski. When he went off working on the boat, he got into that routine of getting up really early because his shift was 5:30 to 11:30. Mm-hmm. And then he'd be off 6 hours and then do the 5:30 in the afternoon to 11:30 at night. And so because of that, when he'd come home, he would still get up early. And so he might be out. I'd wake up getting ready for work and he'd already be out on the lake, and it'd be nobody else on the lake, of course, the sun coming up.
Yeah.
And he just, he didn't have to, he could entertain himself. He didn't have to have people around. He'd make something happen if there was nothing going on.
Yeah.
So
what age was he when he started working on the boat?
18.
So
that was his,
right. Okay. So how did his work schedule work? Because they would do weeks on and then weeks off, correct?
Yeah, he did 30-day hitches, which actually sometimes was a little bit less, a little bit more. It was the 7th and the 22nd. Like if he came home on the 7th, then he'd go back on the 22nd. Okay. If he came home on the 22nd, he'd go back on the 7th.
Gotcha.
But basically, it came out that he was home 2 weeks, gone 4 weeks.
Mm. That's kind of nice to have that longer time period together. Do you feel like when he was home, you'd spend a lot of time with him?
We did until he started. Of course, when he moved out, and when he was with Avery, she was in college, and he had a lot of free time because she was studying and everything, and so he did do a lot, with the family. Mm-hmm. Of course, Christian had a lot of friends, and he wanted to pack a lot of stuff into that 15 days home. So there was a lot. He would go and do a lot.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when he moved out, we didn't see him
really didn't see him hardly at all because he was gone for a month. And then when he was home for that 2 weeks, he was spending it with
got a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of plans and just, he's got people to catch up with and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of going back a little bit. Just how was his school experience? Like, how was he as a student? Did he like school? I already know the answer to that, but for those that don't know, just, what was that his thing? School?
Oh, school was his thing as long as it was a social hour.
Right.
He loved school. He never missed a day of school. And actually, I never had a problem with getting Christian to go to school. It was a problem of getting him to do school work.
Right.
He, barely scraped by many years in school, but his teachers always liked him, and he always made it through somehow. High school, he depended on girlfriends probably to do his schoolwork for him, or mom. I did a lot of his schoolwork for him, but no, he was not much of a student as far as academically. He really liked the social aspect of school. So like I said, I never had a problem with him going to school.
Yeah. It was funny trying to edit down some of the interviews we did with his teachers because they just had so many memories and so many funny stories, and he was just really well liked. And school may have not been his thing, but he was a hard worker. He started working, with your husband, Todd, when he was like 9 years old. Is that correct? And that's a family business.
He always had a good work ethic. I mean, he always was doing something.
Yes.
I mean, whether that was piddling with a motorcycle or, it may not have been a paying job.
Right.
But he was doing something. He was real good about going to my grandmother's, his great-grandmother and house and doing odd jobs for her and, raking leaves and cleaning the leaves out of the gutters and things like that. He probably started having like a paying job at 14 or 15.
And that's great. Yeah. I mean, it's everybody's not cut out for the academic world, and there's different types of work that you can do, and I think it's important to get your child into some type of work, right? Whether that's in school or it's odd jobs or working with family, things like that. And I think
finding where they
I think that's really important, don't you think? Like, just helping nurture that drive to want to do better for yourself and do better for your family, and find out what you enjoy doing too. And that was kind of his journey over the years, was trying to figure out like what he was going to do with his life and what type of work he wanted to do. And through high school, he had a girlfriend named Avery, and she was very impactful on him. Would you say?
Yes, she was a stabilizing force for him.
Kind of helped ground him a little bit, and
and probably kept him out of a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
because a lot of times he probably would have been out doing mischievous things he should not have been doing. But because she was kind of the complete opposite of that. She was very studious, wanted to be a vet, and wanted to have the 4.0 GPA, and so they were kind of polar opposites, which was good for her. It brought her out of her shell. And it was good for him because, again, it kind of calmed him down some and gave him a positive guiding force, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
And he spent a lot of time with her family, and her family was very stable, very good family.
So you would say you're a big fan of that relationship then?
Oh, yes. I mean, I never really got involved. I know people would probably debate that now, but I really never got involved in his relationships because, and I mean, again, he really dated Avery for like 5 years, so it was really pretty much just Avery. But I didn't have to worry if he was with them, and I don't think that they worried if she was with Christian. And they, we're still good friends. I still talk to Avery and Avery's mother all the time.
Right. Oh, good. I was going to ask, how is she doing? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's a veterinarian now.
Good for her.
And loves her job, and she's in a very good positive relationship, and so she's doing very well.
That's great. That's great. So once they graduated high school, that's where they kind of decided to go their separate ways. Because Christian, and how did he get introduced to Magnolia Marina again? How did he get into that? And she was going to go to college and kind of take a different route. So they kind of decided to break up at that point, right?
Well, they dated for probably a year, I would think, a year at least, while he was on the boat. I think that's what probably, was when they decided they did need to take a break, was because she had started college and classes were harder and she was having to study more, and she knew that it was going to be difficult to get into veterinarian school. And so she wanted to make sure she was a straight A student. And, when he would come home, that would not always coincide with a good time for her to go out to a party. I mean, she might have a big test coming up or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think that, she did the right thing and put her career goals and everything, and knew at that time in her life she needed to continue on that path she was on. And they decided to take a break, because of, again, when he came home his 2 weeks, he was wanting to go. And she just couldn't do that. And as far as finding out about Magnolia Marine, I think that one of Todd's friends, his family member worked for Magnolia Marine.
Okay.
And so that was kind of his in. I think they gave him a reference and said, oh, he's a good worker, whatever. And that was how he kind of got hired at 18. I mean, you had to be 18 to apply. And so as soon as he turned 18, he started applying for offshore and tugboat jobs.
Which a lot of people from Meridian and just that area of the country, it's kind of, it seems like if you're not going the academic route career wise, that it's a lot of those types of jobs, whether it's offshore oil or it's stuff going on in the Mississippi River, because there tons of boats are coming up and down that. And so he went and started working as at the very bottom level job, deckhand, and sort of worked his way up from there. And do you remember like him coming home or telling you about his job for the first time and kind of what he thought about it? Or was he at first like, oh, this sucks, or this is super hard? Or was he like, I love this. This is like what I want to do.
The only thing Christian didn't like about his job was the 30 days and only having 2 weeks home, 14 days. Because, if whether you're in a relationship or not in a relationship, those 14 days go by very quickly. Right. And then, you've got 30 days gone. And, when you're working holidays and with his schedule, the first year or two, probably the first 2 years, his schedule fell on every holiday. Like he was working every Christmas, every New Year's, every, with it being how it worked. Wow. And then somebody switched over with him. And so then he started being just the opposite. He was going to be home for Thanksgiving, Christmas, everything. But other than that, I mean, just like any job, you have your bad days where you think, why am I doing this? Like, something happened and he would get blamed for it, or he would have to, he'd have to clean up after somebody else as far as something they had done. And so, but no, I think that other than the time schedule and the way you had to work with that company, not all companies work that way, but that's how they did their scheduling. He never really complained. I mean, it is hard work. But he never really ever complained about working hard.
It could be dangerous too, right? There's definitely some danger involved with it. I mean, you're dealing with heavy machines and boats and things like that. So he gets on the boat, and obviously when you spend that much time on a boat, you get to know the people that you're working with really well. And he absolutely loved his captain and just everybody that he worked with on the boat, right?
Well, he had one good captain, one bad captain.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
And so how it worked, like he would have 2 weeks of the captain that he really liked, and 2 weeks of the captain that it was just how their schedule, did. Yeah. And so, he would let me know which captain it was. I think he just probably pushed back a little bit more with one captain than did the other one. But he did have a very good relationship with one of the captains who really, I think, mentored him and wanted to see him move up.
Sure.
And he had told Christian, that he was going to be retiring in a few years, and he wanted to have Christian at that captain level, which would have been very, very quick. And Christian would have been very, very young to be a captain. But he wanted basically to hand over the reins to Christian when he retired. And so he was very fortunate in that he kind of had people, because it's very unusual for you to go and work on the same boat. They typically move you around. Okay. And he was on that one boat the entire time that he worked at Magnolia Marine. And so he did get the captains were the same. The cook, Cheryl, was the same. And so there were some people who he really did get close bond with.
Yeah, and him and some of the other guys would, goof around. There's that video of them dancing. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Well, you got to fill your time with something, right? I mean, there's not that much to do on the boat, so.
I'm sure there was a lot of practical jokes and pranks.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And it's just, I've never had that experience, and just how, I'm sure he felt kind of isolated at times out on the boat, and, he's got all of this stuff happening back at home, and there's all these things he's looking forward to. And, after he broke up with Avery, when he's home, he's going to parties and having fun with his friends and stuff. And a new girl comes into his life, who he meets, which, if you want to kind of explain how he ended up meeting Whitley and kind of how that all started.
From my understanding, he was at a party across the lake, and she was there, and they were introduced. And, it started off very casual. You just, meet somebody at a party and whatever, hang out here and there. Mm-hmm. And, I think it was pretty casual and laid back the first couple of months, 2-3 months. Then again, with him being gone for a month and then just home for 2 weeks, it takes a little bit of time for anything to get too serious, just because you're not really there.
Right.
But the flip side of that is, I think that because you are on this boat and you're isolated and you don't you don't have the opportunity to meet anybody other than that little window of time you're home, that the people that you have met become very important quickly, because, they do, you have texting and talking on the phone. And so that is your link to home, or to, the outside world, or whatever you want to say. And so those relationships sometimes, I think, get magnified.
Yeah.
Because, again, you're sitting there with a lot of time to just
think about,
and like worry, what I would do, and whatever.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think a lot of just that time he had really, and as we'll see as we go further down, sort of the timeline and the relationship with Whitley, is that all of that gets magnified 10 times over, because he's only home for such a short amount of time, and that time with her is so short that he's got all of this extra time to think about what is Whitley up to at home, and there's Whitley has a past and things going on with her personally in her past and things like that. So it's interesting to me, though, that Christian seemed like he was looking for a long-term relationship. Like when he was with Avery, he was with her for 5 years, and when he met Whitley, it seemed like he really maybe saw a future with her. Did he ever talk to you about plans that he had with Whitley, or where he wanted to take the relationship with her? Did he really see it as a serious relationship that could? Yeah.
Well, to me and his dad, he did not. I mean, actually, he would downplay it. We felt like he was probably moving toward trying to start back communicating with Whitley. He had started making contact with her brother, as far as talking to him. And, I think that he might have sent Lori, Avery's mother, a text message or something kind of randomly. We felt like he was beginning to kind of
go back to,
inching toward seeing what could become of their relationship. Did they have a future? Did they not? Because, I think Kellen, Whitley's brother, had said that he had started kind of asking questions about, was Whitley dating anybody and that kind of thing. And he would always just tell me, because I had concerns about the relationship, and he would just always say, "Oh, Mom, it's not like I'm going to marry her."
Okay.
And Todd had, asked him about them being engaged, because there was a rumor that he had bought a ring and they was engaged, and he was, like, "Well, no, I'm not engaged to her because, Christian liked the girls, and so there had been some other girls." And Todd was like, "You was just telling me about this other girl you kind of like, and so it, to us, it did not seem, we worried that it might get that serious. But at the time of his death, we did not think they were.
Okay.
I think you meant more that he was interested in a long-term relationship in his life. He wanted that.
Oh, no. Yeah. Yes. No, I do think, I misunderstood your question. Christian, but I do think it was because he was in such a long-term relationship with Avery that was almost
he liked that.
That's what he knew.
Yeah.
And
there's stability that comes with that. And I think it must have been difficult for Christian to go from Avery to Whitley when Whitley and them are polar opposites, and Whitley runs kind of in a wilder circle of friends, so to speak. And so his experience going from Avery to Whitley must have been dramatically
Totally
different and stressful and just, you know, like I couldn't even imagine having to go from something so stable to now you're in this situation where, you know, kind of with the wild party girl, I guess you could call it.
Yes, I think that was very stressful for him because he didn't have to worry about what Avery was doing. There was never distrust between them. And, you know, like you said, Whitley came with she had a whole different lifestyle and personality. And so I'm sure he sat there on the boat and would, you know, wonder where is she, who's she with, what's she doing? Where with Avery, you didn't really have to worry about that. You know, you knew she was at school or she was at home studying, you know. And I think that also, you know, Christian had told me, you know, when I would encourage him to date other people or whatever, and he would say, well, you know, it's a little hard to do that when you're only home for 14 days. It's hard to meet somebody unless you just randomly move, you know, kind of like he met Whitley. He randomly met her at a party. Mm-hmm. But he did want that.
Kind of like someone to come home to at the end of the day. That
connection with someone that could, I mean, I'm sure a lot of it had to do with filling your time on the boat. You know, somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to talk to mom all the time. He didn't want to talk to, I mean, you know, you want to have someone that can talk for hours at a time and text and all. And so you do need, I mean, you know, it was important, I'm sure, to a lot of people that work in that kind of job to have someone at home waiting for them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Mm-hmm. I mean, you want to have something to go home to and, you know, feel like your life isn't only on the boat. Like you also have a life outside of your job and out of your work. And, you know, and I think in some ways he was trying to create that and just obviously creating it with the wrong people. And I'm curious, did he ever know of Whitley prior to meeting her at the party? Like it's a pretty small town. So had he had prior contact with her previously?
Not that I'm aware of. And he never, I mean, it never has, no one has ever said, right. No one has ever said, oh, well, yeah, he knew her from, you know, I don't think they had ever crossed paths really. Because Whitley had not always lived in Delwood. She had lived in another community and gone to another school. And so did not, and there was several years difference between them. And so, you know, I don't know exactly when she moved to Delwood, but it had not been that long. So they really didn't have the same circle of friends at all.
At the time that they sort of started talking, who was Christian's best friend? Was it Taylor?
Right. Yeah. Taylor Dial. You know, he had just recently, before, you know, I almost have wondered if maybe, you know, Dylan actually introduced him to Whitley because Dylan was friends with Whitley and he had never really socialized a lot with Dylan. You know, also the thing you have to take into consideration is as you get older, your friends are starting in serious relationships too, or they're getting married or they're whatever. So, you know, you're not, a lot of times your friends are with their girlfriends and doing those kind of things and not going out and partying. So a lot of his friends, you know, again, were not necessarily wanting to just go out when he came home to party.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that's kind of how Dylan entered the picture was because Dylan wasn't dating anybody. He was going out. He lived around the lake. And so I think that they just kind of randomly met up somewhere and then ended up becoming pretty.
They're just kind of both in the same place in their lives, you know, and they were connecting on that and connecting on, you know, Christian wanted to have fun. He wanted to come home and make the most of his time, have a good time. And Dylan was sort of the facilitator of like where that good time was. And obviously Whitley is now a part of that as well. So Whitley and Christian are dating and they actually moved in with you guys for a period of time. What was that like?
At first it was fine. I mean, you know, she was
kind of on your best behavior at first, respectful.
Right.
And
I mean, I'm sure like anybody would be when you're in someone's home that you don't really know. Because I did not know her or any of her family at all until Christian brought her around. And then as time went by, you know, things started to happen that did not go well. And there were things that would come up missing, and there was just behaviors that I started picking up on that I didn't feel like were very positive. And so I would talk to Christian about that and be like, you know, and again, encourage him to maybe date somebody else or to go date, you know, just date around. You don't have to be in this relationship. And, he always took up for her and made excuses for her behavior. And so then when my son asked him to move in with him because, he needed help paying the rent and everything, that was in November of 2013 when Christian moved in with Josh.
Oh, right.
But I can't remember exactly. I would say that she probably stayed at the house for maybe 2 months, 3 months at the most.
And did Christian just ask you to let her move in? And
yes, he told me, I'm a nurse practitioner and I've always worked with children. And so I kind of have a bleeding heart when it comes to kids and young people. And he told me that she had a bad family situation and didn't have anywhere to live. And, that her mother had kicked her out. And so could she come stay there? And I was like, well, I guess she can stay here for a little bit until, they can work things out. And so it was meant to be a temporary situation, which it was a temporary situation, but it just went downhill pretty quickly.
Okay, so just even a couple weeks into her being there, you were already seeing red flags.
Yeah, probably 2-3 weeks. And then when he left to go on the boat, it was his understanding she would stay there because she didn't have anywhere to live.
Right. Yeah.
And he had asked me would I take her to school because she was in high school, and I said sure, I guess so.
Nice of you. Yeah.
And so, we would drop her off at school, but then she started not being at the house and not going to school. That was, an issue that she had a past history of truancy. And so and I would call Christian and say, well, look, she's not here. I can't take her to school if she's not here.
Yeah.
And so then when he wouldn't be there, she was just kind of there hit or miss. I mean, and so then the question was, well, does she really not have somewhere to stay if she, has somewhere to stay when you're gone? So again, it just didn't go well.
Are you paying down old credit card debt? A personal loan could be your solution. Loans usually come with fixed monthly payments, making them a simple way to help pay off your credit cards. Plus, loans usually have lower interest rates than credit cards do, and Credit Karma can help you find the best option for you. I've actually been in this exact situation before. When I got out of college, I had a number of different credit cards that had really high balances, and I was just paying tons of interest every month, and I actually used a personal loan to consolidate all those credit cards, pay them off, and then pay the personal loan off with that one monthly payment. It was really nice, and I was able to get debt free a lot sooner than I would have if I had to pay each credit card down separately. Credit Karma is great because it uses your credit data to find loan offers that are personalized to you, so you can have a better idea of what loan amount you can get approved for. Credit Karma will even show you your chances of approval so you can choose between loan offers that you're more likely to get approved for and apply with more confidence. Comparing loan offers on Credit Karma is 100% free, and it won't affect your credit scores, and it could save you money. Ready to apply? Head to creditkarma.com/loan offers to see personalized offers. Go to creditkarma.com/loan offers to find the loan for you. That's creditkarma.com/loan offers.
You guys know that we love the break-in protection that our Simply Safe home security system gives us, but it's not always outside forces that you need Simply Safe protection from. Meet Amy, a Simply Safe customer and a chronic sleepwalker who lives near a 4-lane highway. One night, a few months ago, she sleptwalked right out of her bedroom and then she continued right out the front door. That is a dangerous situation, and she could have been heading for a big accident. Luckily, as she walked out of her house, the Simply Safe entry sensor on her front door triggered the 95 dB siren in the base station. That is loud. Loud enough, in fact, to wake her up before she wandered into the street or into some other trouble. And seconds later, Amy even got a call from Simply Safe checking to make sure that everything was okay. Amy was a little groggy, but she was just fine. Amy actually says that on that sleepy night, Simply Safe saved her life. Protecting people in ways that they never could have imagined is just one of the reasons that more than 4 million people use and love Simply Safe, and Josh and I are also two of those people. We especially love the Simply Safe app and just how clear the indoor and outdoor cameras are. It just makes me feel so much safer that I can look outside around my house at any time I want to, check on my dogs, make sure my property is safe. And that's why we love Simply Safe. So you can customize the perfect system for you and your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/milehigher. Go today and claim a free indoor security camera plus 20% off with interactive monitoring. Again, go to simplysafe.com/milehigher. So there were several incidents. We don't have time to go over everything that happened with Whitley while she was staying with you guys, but one thing that always stands out to me is the famous story of the picture. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that a little bit?
I have like a sitting area, which I call a library, off of my bedroom, and I have pictures of the kids through the years. And of course, because Avery and Christian had dated for so long, there's some pictures that she was in. Mm-hmm. And, when they broke up, I didn't go take down all the Avery pictures. They were still up. And so one night I was reading, and Whitley came into my room, and she put a picture down on the bed or right there by me and said, "This is what I think of this." And it was a picture of Christian, but then the face of Avery had been like holes punched in it or shot out or whatever. Mm. And I said, "Well, what is that?" And she says, "Well, that was a picture of Avery and Christian." And she said, "I shot her face out." And I said, so I went to Christian and I was like, "Christian, this isn't normal."
No.
I mean, she came into my room, took a picture, then went and destroyed it. And then on top, I said, that what makes it worse is then you come and bring it to me and show me to be sure that I know what you have done. Yeah. Because I probably would have never missed the picture. I mean, really.
Yeah.
And I just told him, I said, I just don't think that's normal behavior, that, you're not respecting. I wouldn't go into someone's bedroom. That even if I was staying there, I would not go into their bedroom and then take something.
Especially my boyfriend's mother. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of weird in that sense as well. And how far into her staying with you guys did that happen?
It was a month or so, because like I said, she really wasn't there that long because of different things. That was just kind of like probably one of the most red flag. I mean, the biggest red flag. Totally. And then, when we had the issue with Alexa and found out that she had given Alexa Xanax, it was like, she's got to go. I mean, now you're impacting, other family members.
Yeah. And so that was also a really big incident that happened. She gave your daughter drugs.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
She really didn't like Alexa.
No. And she, and so there's still a lot of conflict there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She really just started causing a lot of issues for the whole family at that point. And were you starting to kind of think of like, who is this person really? Like, there's something just really off about her, and obviously she has a very troubled past. Did you really know anything about her past or where she had even come from? Did Christian even know, or was she kind of like giving him a certain version of herself? It seems like sometimes, like,
yeah, she would, whether they were true or not, she would tell Christian, she would kind of justify some of the things that were said about her, and would, typically present herself as a victim. And Christian also kind of has this savior complex of feeling like he needs to save, people who need saving. And I didn't know anything about her. And then I started when kind of, her and Christian, I guess word got out they were dating. Then I would have parents and people texting me or calling me and saying, you really don't want him dating her. Really? And they would say, their experience with her, and I would take those concerns to Christian and say, look, I'm really worried about this. There were some things that she had posted on, I don't know whether it was Twitter or Instagram. I think it was Twitter. Yeah. That, of a lot of drug use, kind of bragging and making fun of drug use. And I was, concerned about that. Again, just all these red flags started coming up. And because I had never really become involved in Christian's relationships, it was kind of unusual for me to be sitting here going, asking questions and all that.
Digging in so deep.
Yeah, because I just had never had to. Mm-hmm. And Christian, knowing that I didn't want him to continue to date her, he began just not telling me things, because just to keep from having conflict. Well, then, we just won't talk about Whitley. We'll talk about everything else but Whitley. And so she became kind of like a topic that just was not brought up. Like if he was on the boat and calling me, we would talk about everything else, but not Willie.
Interesting. Yeah. I get that to some extent from his part. I mean, you guys had a great relationship. He doesn't want to jeopardize anything with you, but at the same time, he really likes Whitley, and he wants to keep that going with him or with her. And I'm sure he was torn. I'm sure he was torn at times of, I want to tell my mom more, but I also don't want to hear things that I don't want to hear. Go against sort of how I feel.
Tense.
Do you feel like he was in the dark on a lot of things that was actually going on back at home with Whitley? Do you think Whitley?
How transparent was she about her life with him? Do you think?
Oh,
while he was gone,
I think it was constant lying and deception. I mean, even in the text messages. I mean, when the text messages from his phone came out. I mean, it's obvious that way early on. I mean, at the very beginning of the relationship, there's trust issues from the very get go.
Yeah.
And there are things that I'm sure that he didn't know about, that nobody knows about, but just the things that he found out about, and the lack of trust as far as other guys and everything. And then him, the flip side of that, having people calling him and texting him saying, well, I saw Whitley doing this. I saw Whitley doing that. Yeah. I heard Whitley did this. And he knows he's on a boat and can't do anything about it. He can't,
that's got to be
so yeah, it's very frustrating. Which again is probably why I'm sure there's a high rate of failed relationships and people who work in that industry.
Yeah.
Just because you have to have a very trusting relationship for anything to last.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got to have a good
stable
foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And you really need serious time with somebody to get to know them. And, I sometimes wonder, I'm like, how well did he know her? Like, did he spend enough time with her that he really, because I'm like, Christian seemed like he's a smart guy. I feel like if he had enough time with her, he might have been able to, these issues that Whitley was presenting would have really became more known to him, to the point where he might have come to the realization that this is just not worth my time. Like, why am I putting all this time and energy into somebody who's not giving me what I need? And in order to, proceed with this relationship, and especially in the, looking at the long term, like, and it's difficult. And I can just almost feel like how torn he must have been, trying, and just how frustrated and angry that, he's getting these text messages, he's hearing about what she's doing at home, and he's out on the boat, and he's thinking about what he's going to say to her, what he's going to do when he gets off the boat, and how is he sort of going to, deal with the situation. I mean, she's just really just creating tons of problems for him, and he feels almost like helpless that he can't deal with them because he's gone for this long period of time. That must have been really, really difficult. So Whitley, you end up kicking Whitley out. I think you kicked her out a couple times. And then Josh he went through a divorce, and so an extra bedroom opened up, and he invited Christian to come live with him, right?
Right. And to go back to what you were just talking about, though, I've never thought of that, as far as thinking about that, if he had not been working on the boat, like with Avery.
Yeah, that's what I was really
like you have all these years of building that relationship and knowing that person before you go off and work on the boat. But because everything is kind of on hyper mode, because
like
I've got to get all this in this short period of time, because then I'm going. And very good point, Josh. I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And well, I feel his frustration and I mean, that probably upsets me more than a lot of other things, is that I can almost feel his, that frustration and that building of probably knowing what you need to do, but also not wanting to do it. And it's like Todd said, I've said this before, and Todd was right. After all this, he said, we always taught him how to treat a good girl right. He said, we never taught him how to treat a bad girl wrong. That's
a good way to put it.
And he said, because she had always been with a good girl,
right.
And he'd always, and we never had to say, well, now sometimes you just got to treat them like, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And Josh his brother has pointed out that he felt like that Christian was always pushing Whitley to break up with him and cut it off, because, like, to be the one to just do it, because he said Christian didn't know how to break up with somebody. Because he had never been in that position.
Doesn't have that experience of how to deal with that.
Because even he and Avery wasn't like it was like a mutual, okay, let's take some time off. Then a year from now, we may get back together. But there was no just, hey, look, I'm tired of you, or I'm sick of this, or whatever. And I don't think he knew how to stop helping her.
Right.
And to say,
enough's
because
enough.
in his mind, if he stopped helping her, nobody was going to help her. And she was a lost cause.
She's younger too. And I mean, he cared about her.
Yeah. And just from her life experience, and she's had a very different upbringing and grew up in a different environment. And she's kind of has to be scrappy and kind of figure out how to manipulate situations or people to try to, almost like she's in this survival mode, I guess you could call it. And Christian's had a much more stable upbringing. So he's lacking that insight of how that other side works. And he's trying to, he's got such a good heart and such, he's got so much love for her that he's trying to bring her over to his side and trying to win her over and show her that this is the right way to do things. And she just has no concept of that. She's never, I don't know her personally, but from everything I've heard is that she doesn't really have that sort of foundation in her life that Christian had. And that's a difficult thing to build in somebody, especially in such a short amount of time.
Yeah. And being gone so often. And that's it's like any progress he probably did make kind of got lost when he would be back on the boat.
And I just wonder if things would have been different had he not had a different job, or he had been there every day with her, and maybe not. But that's just something I've always thought about. I'm just like, it's just such a hard thing to really deal with, because it's like he was trying to do what was best for him in his life, and he's just following his heart, right? He's just following his feelings and the way he feels about somebody, and it's in the right way too. He really likes this person. He really wants to see them make it work.
Save people.
But yeah, it's just, and not having that experience of how do I let go and realize that, maybe there's somebody else out there that is going to have those qualities and things that I need. And obviously there's a lot more malicious behavior on the other side and manipulation, because ultimately there's other things she's looking to get out of Christian other than just, have this loving relationship. And maybe that was never her intention from the get-go, but just something I think about sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, I think if he had more time, he would have been able to see more of that, So going back, you guys did kick Whitley out, and that probably caused a lot of tension. I'm sure Christian wasn't thrilled that happened. So how long was she gone the first time you kicked her out?
My timeline probably ain't going to add up if we sat here and added these months up, but because I've never just sat down and done a timeline. But as far as about that, but estimate. I would say 2 months. It wasn't 2. I'd say 2. I'm going by like his hitches. Okay. I would say probably 2 hitches, because which would be 2-3 months. It upset me because he felt like that if she can't be here, then I can't be here.
Right.
And I would say, no, Christian, you can be here, and I'm not saying you can't date her or be with her or whatever, but she just can't stay here,
Yeah.
And in his mind, it was kind of an all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
Like if, and it wasn't that he was like mad and saying you won't, it was more of a reconcile to, well, it was never any exchange of words or him being mad or upset or saying, how dare y'all kick her out. It was just more of a, okay, I understand. But if she can't be here, I want to be with her when I'm home for those 14 days. So I'm going to be wherever she is. And so, I think that some people try to portray it like there was some hostility there. It was never any hostility. We never had any.
Understood why you had to do it.
Right. And I mean, we continued to talk and whatever. Of course, he just didn't come around the house as much because he was with her. And so I gave in because I wanted him back home.
Yeah. I mean, you're in a tough position.
I wanted, and so it became, so even though I said I would never do that, I said, hey, look, if we can have some ground rules, she can come back, and everything. And so that happened. And then Josh asked him to move out with him. And we had already told her she had to leave again. And she came to the house and packed up all of his stuff. I'll never forget this. His birthday was November 4th. He came back on November 7th. And we always had big birthdays, like with the family. It was just a little tradition. We got a cake, and it'd be decorated some way like that would be reflective of them. And whoever birthday it was, they got to pick where we went out to eat. And then all the family would go, my even extended family would go. And so that day, the 7th, I had gotten him this big cake that was, 21, finally legal. It said it had a beer can pouring beer down and had poker chips because he could not finally get into the casino legally and everything. That's cool. I kept calling him, and now I think that he probably didn't get the messages now that I know that she at times had his phone and whatever.
Right.
But I kept calling and trying to make arrangements like, what time are you going to be here? What time, where are we going to go eat? And all. When I finally got him, he was like, well, I've got to go do this with Whitley, and let's just cook out at the house, which was fine, but it was kind of departing from our tradition.
Right.
And I was like, fine, okay, what time are you going to be there? Oh, okay, well, I'm going to be there, whatever, 7, whatever time. And so then we get there, and we wait, and they're late. They're really late. And she had already come to the house and packed up all of his stuff. And he was saying, because they were going to go to Josh's, and he was saying, well, I'm just going to, probably one of the few times I heard them argue in front of us. We're just going to stay here tonight. No sense. By this time it was 9 or 10 o'clock. We'll just stay here and we can move our stuff. No, she was insistent they was going to leave that night. It was going to leave that night. So they get their stuff and leave. Well, then I found out that she had taken a bunch of stuff. I don't know whether she threw it away, gave it away, but it was like expensive, like pullovers and Patagonias and, all this kind of stuff. And so I call them and I'm like, where is the bag that had all these pullovers and everything? Because I said, all of those were not yours. Some of those were mine. Some of them were Alexa's, whatever. And he's like, oh, well, she said that she gave them to somebody, that she thought that they were mine. And I'm like, but it's not her stuff. It's whatever. So here it is, his first night back, and we're already having conflict with her about her. Mm-hmm. Anyway, things did not go as our normal birthdays went. And that became kind of what happened from then on. He really wasn't home that much when you think about it because of being gone for 3 months, a month at a time. So there was really only, 3 more hitches before,
Yeah. So did he like living with Josh when he was home? Did he like living with his brother, or were they how was Josh kind of viewing everything at that point? Was he starting to, did Josh ever come and talk to you about what he was observing with Whitley while he was off on the boat? I
think Josh was caught kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, he wants to be loyal to Christian, and he knows how we feel about the situation. But then on the other hand, he's concerned. Well, I know he wasn't as concerned as we were, just because he's kind of dealing with his own stuff, as far as going through a divorce that was not expected. Yeah. And, he was kind of going through a rough period himself. And, he would voice concerns as far as say that, they got into a fight and Christian kicked her out. And then he really wouldn't bring it up unless I flat out asked him a question.
He was just Whitley, forthcoming with the information.
Right. Is Whitley there all the time? Is Whitley living there? Is Whitley, and I tried not to, quite frankly, she really had become a subject that none of us was talking. We all avoided mentioning her name because it caused tension between all of us. And, I feel like a lot of it was intentional. A lot of it was her alienating him from his family so that it was just her. And as far as him liking living with Josh, I don't know, because he never, I know he didn't like, living in an apartment is a lot different from living at a lake where you can jump on a jet ski and go boat, whatever. And so, I know he didn't like being confined in a small space. He didn't have a yard. He didn't have a place to, park a dirt bike and do all that kind of stuff. So, he was looking for a house. He actually, in December, I still have the pictures on my phone. He had asked me, would I go to a house at Delwood that was up for sale and take pictures and send to him because he was wanting to buy it. And he said, fix it up and then rent it or sell it or live in it. And so I know that he was thinking about trying to find somewhere bigger and somewhere of his own.
Yeah. I'm sure he missed Dalewood a lot after he had a taste of the apartment life for a little while.
Yeah. Really different. Yeah.
So let's talk about Dylan for a moment here, because Dylan plays a very big role in this whole case, and just there's some misconceptions about Dylan out there, and even in a 48 hours that came out, his mother said that they were best friends. She used those words, best friends, and that isn't necessarily the case based on everything that we know.
Right. No, they were not best friends. He may have been Dylan's best friend.
Right. Dylan might have called him best friend.
I mean, his best friend would have been Taylor.
Right.
And even though, just because you spend a lot of your time with someone doesn't make them your best friend. It's just the person that is available.
Right.
Right. I think that, he probably made a lot of effort to be around because Christian paid for everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was a good person to be a friend with.
Generous.
Works hard.
And, things have been, even recently in the last year, that Dylan has said that definitely contradicts him even treating him as a best friend, as far as Dylan to Christian. And, he has said some pretty harsh things about Christian. So I don't even know if he thinks really that Christian was his best friend. I think that it just sounded good at the time.
Right, right. Kind of convenient for his story. It's very clear that Dylan and Whitley were sort of leeching off of Christian. They were taking advantage of his generosity, paying for meals, giving them a place to stay when he's home. Kind of he was the guy to hang out with.
Dylan would be at the apartment when Christian was on the boat.
Right. Yes.
And his whole deal is like, I'll kind of babysit Whitley while not those exact words, but he would kind of watch
loosely. Yeah.
But there's also how much was he actually really even doing that too? And did they run in the same circles, Dylan and Whitley, before they introduced Christian to Whitley?
Probably loosely.
Yeah.
I mean, not exactly the same circles, but had some overlap in friends.
Okay.
Right.
We knew very little about Dylan. He had just never been, he came over to our house once or twice during that time period when, right prior to Christian meeting Whitley. And even after that, we really didn't see him. And I didn't really know very much about him. And just from all the time, over the years of talking to people, it seems that Dylan could be two different people. I mean, with some people, he's this way, and with some people, they view him very differently. So for years, I thought of Dylan one way. And then, just because that was kind of the demeanor that I had seen. And then later, when we talked to other people and they started describing some of the things that he had done and been involved in, it was like, that's just like a totally different person. So I do think there's two sides to Dylan. So, I guess that it depends on what side of Dylan, was at the apartment that day.
So they spent, when Christian was home, they definitely spent a decent amount of time together, and Christian would talk with Dylan about lots of different things. And so those two both knew about Christian's job on the boat and the insurance policy that he had on the boat as well. Do you want to kind of talk about that a little bit?
Well, there was talk about an insurance policy. When all this came out, we couldn't really understand why a 21-year-old would even be talking about a life insurance policy. Because when I was 21, I wasn't thinking about, I got to go get that life insurance policy. No. And he had mentioned it to them on the boat. Some coworkers kind of bragged about having taken out $1 million life insurance policy. And then he had asked Todd, actually, his work paid for a life insurance policy for all their employees. And he had Avery down as his beneficiary. And he had talked to Todd about changing the beneficiary to Whitley. And Todd had told him, no, don't do that. You and her aren't going to probably be together. Just leave it like it is, And he did. He left it like it was. But we just could never understand why he was even talking about life insurance
kind of a weird
policy.
thing to even be.
And so from, text messages, it looks like Whitley had told him that she was pregnant at one point, and I think there was questions about, well, how would I take care of the baby? If something happened to you, how would I take care of the baby? And I think that probably planted in his head that, well, something may happen to me out here. And, Christian like to elaborate, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
Is a nice way of saying sometimes.
Sure.
He, was bragging about taking out this life insurance policy. I'm assuming that he had told her that, don't worry about it. I've taken out this life insurance policy. Now, do we have any, was that in text or anything? No.
Yeah. No definitive.
And then after his death, Dylan went to his grandfather, to Christian's grandfather, and said that, hey, what about this life insurance policy? Because, Whitley needs a car, Whitley needs whatever. And so that's why we know that it had been discussed.
Okay. That makes sense. So let's move to February 22nd, 2014. Christian boarded the boat for a 30-day hitch. And Josh also worked on a boat as well, a separate boat. He was on a 30-day hitch as well. And Josh's hitch had started on February 7th. And during the month of February, Christian and Josh texted a lot about his relationship with Whitley. And it seemed to Josh that things weren't going very well. Does that kind of sound like what Josh said?
Right. And we had some conversations with Josh, or I had a couple of conversations where I had asked about it. And I think that's even mentioned in the text messages, like Christian saying, well, my mom asked me about, where y'all broke up. And, Christian had told Josh that they were broke up, that he had told her to get out and basically be gone, when he came back. This was also the first time that Whitley was going to be at the apartment by herself. In the past, Josh had always been there. Like when Christian was on the boat, Josh had been home. So this was the first time for her to kind of have free reign without anybody there to supervise her.
So when Christian was home, things would be like sort of okay with Whitley, but this last time they were bad before he even boarded the boat. And, he wanted her completely out by that time. Whitley moved into apartment 801 loosely. I mean, was she like fully living there?
Yes. Josh, I think that he said that he didn't know that she would be there even when Christian was gone. He thought that she would go back to her grandmother's or somewhere when he would leave.
Yeah.
But she didn't. She was there.
Okay.
And Christian had asked Josh to drug test Whitley. He was trying to put a stop to the things that Whitley was doing. He was trying to sort of rein her in. But Whitley refused, and she had actually failed for marijuana and benzos as well. So Josh kicked her out at that point.
At Christian's orders.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And how old was Whitley at this time?
17.
Okay.
16,
and she was
17.
Barely going to school at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. So February 24th, Josh asked Christian about his relationship with Whitley. Josh said that he thought Christian should break up with Whitley. And at that point, Christian said he was set on breaking up with Whitley and moving out to Jackson. He wanted a fresh start at this point. So did it seem like Christian was secure in that decision? I mean, to you, I know this was all kind of happening from a distance for you at that point.
Right. Josh actually told me that he was talking about leaving his job, going to another company and moving to Jackson. And so I said something to Christian about that and was trying to make the point of don't quit a job that you've been at for a while and you're moving up pretty fast over a girl,
right.
Don't,
she's not worth it.
Right. And so, and he was telling me how, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to move until Mama, my grandmother, his great grandmother, he was very close to her. He said, as long as she's kicking, as he said, I'm going to be around. And, so that was kind of, he said, I've just, somebody had told me about a job and somebody had called and offered me a job and I was just thinking about it. So he kind of downplayed everything.
Every time my phone makes that sound, I know that I've just had another sale on Shopify. Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Shopify gives entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business. So upstarts, startups, and established businesses alike can sell everywhere, synchronize online and in-person sales, and effortlessly stay informed. Scaling your business is a journey of endless possibility. When we first got into this whole world of podcasting and merchandise, I really had no idea where to start with getting an online store set up. But that's, I did a few Google searches and that led me to Shopify. I've got to say I've set up Shopify stores on my own completely with no experience. And it was actually really, really easy. I mean, even a monkey could do it. It's really that simple. They have tons of courses through Shopify Learn that you can take to help you get any type of shop that you need set up. And Shopify gives you tons of insights into your financials, including the reporting of conversion rates, profit margins, and more. Shopify is more than a store, it grows with you. This is possibility powered by Shopify. Just go to shopify.com/milehigher like I did, all lowercase, for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Grow your business with Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/milehigher right now. Again, that's shopify.com/milehigher.
You guys, HelloFresh saves us so much time. We are very busy these days, and having a HelloFresh meal ready to go in our fridge that we can just pop open and cook up real quick makes our life a lot easier. And HelloFresh is 72% cheaper than dining at a restaurant. Pretty cool. And it's also cheaper than grocery shopping. That's money back in your pocket. You can customize your favorite dishes with their new Hello Custom offerings by swapping out one protein or one side for another, upgrading for a more luxe experience, or even adding protein to a veggie meal. That means more choices, more variety, and more meals truly tailored for you. You can pick your favorites from 50 different weekly menu options, and you can skip weeks when you need to, change your delivery date, or update your preferences all conveniently in the HelloFresh app. You guys are going to want to check it out if you are not a HelloFresh customer already. You can get signed up at HelloFresh.com/milehigher16 and use code milehigher16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. Again, that's HelloFresh.com/milehigher16. Use code milehigher16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Okay, so the night of the 25th, February, Dylan calls Christian multiple times, and Christian tried getting hold of Whitley, but she never answered any of his calls. Dylan told Christian that Whitley had taken his car out to the shop, and she had been driving all over town with some guy. So Christian decided to get off the boat and head home. And you weren't aware that he had made that decision at that point, were you?
No.
So he tells his captain that he'd be back the next day by crew change at 5:30. And so everyone on the boat is under that assumption that that's his plan. He's going to kick Whitley out of the house again and then come back to work. So Whitley had already, or out of the apartment, I should say. Whitley had already been kicked out. She was not supposed to be at the apartment. And now Christian needed to kick her out again. So he left on the morning of the 26th. And he came up with sort of a cover story to get off the boat. He was pretty determined to get back to Meridian. So he said that someone was going to pick him up from St. Rose, Louisiana, where the boat was docking. And it's about a 4-hour drive from Meridian. Christian's Jeep was parked hours away from St. Rose in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where he originally boarded the boat. And he had 2 pistols, correct? One in his Jeep in the driver's side door and the other in the lockbox under his bed. And were you aware that he had those? And that, did you know at that point that he was keeping them?
We didn't know he had the pistol in the lockbox. We didn't know about a lockbox, actually. And we knew that Todd's grandfather had bought him because I think Christian wasn't old enough to legally get the gun. Yeah. So Todd's grandfather had actually, Christian paid for the gun, but his grandfather had bought the gun. It was in his grandfather's name. Okay. We knew he had that gun, which he kept, usually under his seat in his Jeep or wherever he was. If he came into the apartment, he'd bring it in, which, we still feel like that the gun was not at the apartment, that it was probably in his Jeep.
Okay. And so that night around 2:30, he calls a fellow deckhand named Justin, who he was pretty close with. Would you say that was kind of his best friend from work?
Yeah, a good friend from work. Yeah, his work friend, I guess you'd say.
Okay. And so he asked him to come up and get him. And he told him the same story that he gave the office, that something had come up with his mom and sister. Justin agrees to pick him up. And he was just about to leave when Christian called back and told him, never mind, don't worry about it. Christian also said someone else was going to come pick him up, and that person owed him money. Justin was trying to ask what was wrong, but Christian didn't really tell him what was going on. Justin wanted to still come out and pick him up, but Christian told him, yeah, don't worry about it.
So the person coming to pick up Christian that morning was actually Dylan Swearingen. According to Dylan, Christian called him around 1:30 a.m. and asked him to come down and pick him up in St. Rose. Dylan agreed, and Christian said that he needed to be there between 7:45 a.m. and 8 a.m. Dylan said that he left his house around 3:45 to 4 a.m., and he called Christian when he got there. These next couple points I'm going to read are actually from the statement that he gave to police. So he said that Christian came down the hill towards his car and took off his blue work jumpsuit. He told Dylan that he had left work without permission and that the ship's security and the sheriff were notified of this. Christian and Dylan talked like normal for a while, and eventually they pulled over to fill up Dylan's truck. When they got back on the interstate, Christian said that he and Whitley were having problems. He told Dylan that he was coming home because Whitley had been hanging out with some boy named Matt Miller. When they pulled up, they could see the BMW Christian got Whitley was in the parking lot.
So Christian bought Whitley a BMW?
Somewhat. Loosely, I mean, he bought it for himself because he said that his truck didn't get good gas mileage, and then he got in a Jeep. But I mean, he was letting her drive it when
he was gone.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's convenient for her. I'm sure she was enjoying that.
So according to Dylan, when they walked in the apartment, Christian asked Whitley where she had been. They'd had trackers on each other's phones, and Christian could see that Whitley had spent the night at Matt's house. Christian started to ask Whitley questions about what she was doing there, and Whitley told Christian that she had done Xanax and she couldn't remember everything she and Matt had done that night. Dylan said he didn't want to interfere with their argument, so he stayed upstairs, and at one point he stuck his head over the stairs and heard Christian saying over and over again, "Do you love me?" Then Christian pulled out his gun, cocked it, and put it against his head, and he asked Whitley again if she loved him. Whitley said yes and tried to pull the gun away. Dylan then came and was able to take the gun away from Christian, and he put it behind a curtain because Christian was quote unquote acting aggressive. So this is again coming from Dylan, and we'll get into, there's discrepancies in the stories here, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But apparently things calmed down for a little while and they watched a movie. Dylan asked if he and Whitley wanted a moment alone and went to grab some food. Christian gave him his debit card, and at that point he told Dylan to grab Chick-fil-A and then take all of the money out of his account.
Because that's something someone ever tells anyone.
Right. Makes no sense. Christian had also broken Whitley's phone in a previous argument, so Dylan said he had taken the phone in for repairs. At around 12:30 p.m., Dylan went to the bank and tried to withdraw the money, but they told him that the account holder would have to take the money out. And then he went to Chick-fil-A at around 1:06 p.m., and this is backed up by receipts and security photos. When Dylan got back, everything seemed fine, and they watched another movie. Christian and Whitley left the house to take a ride, and Dylan apparently fell asleep. When he woke up about 2 hours later, Whitley was sleeping, and Christian was sitting on the couch smoking a cigarette, and Dylan told him he was going to Best Buy to look at some speakers. Before he left, he told Christian that he had hidden the gun, but he gave it back to Christian and told him to unload it and just leave it alone. And none of this really makes any sense at all. Like, why would Dylan give the gun back after he allegedly put it to his head like that? I mean, what are your thoughts on just those statements that I just read?
I know that's a lot.
Yeah.
Process.
Yeah.
Well, just some things that I'd point out is him saying that he took the gun from Christian also gives him an alibi of his fingerprints being on the gun.
Good point.
If you add up the time frame of his story, it would take more. It would take 2 or 3 hours more than the time period that they have.
Right.
I think that he goes on to say they watch another movie. So you're talking about you watched 2 movies, you went to Best Buy, you went to all these places, you came back, you left again, you came back. It's not enough time, in the time period, but no one seemed to check out, the story about the movies and everything.
Or Best Buy, for that matter.
Right.
They didn't find any footage of him at Best Buy, or there was a weird thing with that, wasn't there? Yeah.
Well, Best Buy, they never checked with Best Buy, and when they did check, Best Buy said that the footage had already been, they only keep it for so much period of time. The alibi at Best Buy did not pan out.
Right.
That he said that he talked to. They said they could not remember if he was there or not. They talked to several people from Best Buy, and no one could place him there. The story about going to AT&T, AT&T does not fix phones. So why would you take it to AT&T to be fixed? Mm-hmm. That's what Dylan does, is fix iPhones and hack them or crack them or whatever.
Jailbreak them and stuff.
That word.
Yeah.
And so it really didn't make sense. Dylan.
Where is he taking it to be fixed?
Right.
If he's already capable of doing that himself.
And we really, don't think the phone was broken to begin with. I mean, we know that, Whitley had a burner phone that she's using at the same time as having that phone. There is a voice message that is left on her phone that she listens to. So if her phone was broke, how did she listen to the voice message? If after supposedly the phone was broke,
right.
And where was the phone? Mm-hmm. The police didn't get a phone. There was not a broken phone in the apartment. Where did the phone go to? Mm-hmm. And nobody's been able to produce the phone. So I really think that she knew, or she thought that they would ask for her phone. Mm-hmm. And, if the phone was broke and he took it somewhere, then that means there's no,
it takes care of that for her. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then when Dylan supposedly comes back from Best Buy, he knows that Christian wasn't in the living room. So he walks around the apartment calling Christian's name, but there's no answer. Dylan noticed that one of the bathroom lights was on and the door was closed. He figured Christian was just taking a shower. He knocked and asked if Christian was all right, but there was no response. And just, there's a lot of question marks with that. And I mean, you can't hear, you don't know for sure if there's a shower on, or you don't know, like you don't go into the door's cracked, or like it just,
when you've heard it.
Mm-hmm. It's a small apartment too. Like this apartment is very, very small. Any sort of activity going on, somebody's going to be able to know what's going on in there. Mm-hmm. So then Dylan walked down to Whitley's room where she was sleeping, he said, and told her that they needed to check on him. Whitley went back to sleep, and Dylan went back to knock on the bathroom door, and he asked Christian, "Are you okay?" And again, there's no response. And at that point, Dylan opens the door, and that's when he finds Christian laying face down across the bathtub there's a pool of blood in the tub. And at that point, Dylan yelled, "Whitley, Christian is dead. We have to call 911. Whitley screams, runs upstairs, and starts holding Christian, and Dylan calls 911 at approximately 4:45 p.m. and told them to come to Christian's apartment. A lot of things don't make sense with that account of events, but we'll get into that here in a sec. But let's listen to just a clip of the 911 call here real quick.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, it's very very telling.
Christian.
911, where's your emergency?
Ma'am, we've had a suicide.
You had a suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what's your address?
The Woodland Apartments.
Woodland Apartments? What apartment number?
801.
Apartment 801?
Yes, ma'am. You see a BMW and a C71.
All right, who is it, sir?
Christian Andreacchio.
Chris Andreacchio?
Yeah.
Okay, he's not breathing?
No, ma'am.
What was your first name?
Dylan.
Dylan?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Dylan, stay on the phone with me, okay?
Okay.
So there's many things about the 911 call. Mm-hmm. First off, I find it very weird that Dylan immediately says, "We have a suicide."
Yeah.
And like, that's just kind of a
immediately
bizarre thing to say. Mm-hmm. Like, you already know exactly what happened. You're making sure that you're stating the exact event that occurred to 911.
Instead of, "I opened the bathroom door, my friend is on the floor."
Yeah. Or something. He may have shot himself. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of other things that you could say to.
He's setting that narrative immediately.
Right. What's your, like, when you first heard the 911 call, what was your like gut reaction to it? Like,
well, we didn't hear it for a long time because we couldn't get it. And so a lot of information had come out by the time we heard the 911 call. And so I guess I already was very cynical in my belief of the 911 call already. But, I just felt like that it was a staged phone call. Whitley sounds very over the top or whatever. But then she cuts it off at one point very abruptly. Mm-hmm. You can hear a phone ringing at one point, which we assume was her burner phone. We actually had a 911 expert analyze the 911 call, and he, said he'd testify and state that it was a staged phone call because of some of the things you've pointed out, that we have a suicide. I mean, you're already putting out there.
Right. The narrative.
Right. And
setting the narrative because that information is directly going to get related to officers that are responding. And if that's what the dispatch is writing into the call notes, I mean, I think officers know what they're about to walk into. They're going to walk in there and the first thing on their mind is going to be a suicide. And it's very convenient to say it in that way. And also the misleading the Woodland Apartments. And it's like, they're not in the Woodland Apartments. So that's north of where they're at. That's not even close to where he's actually at. And Dylan's been at Christian's apartment many times. He knows how to get there on his own. So why conveniently make that mistake and not say the exact right address?
Well, and to me, just the statement, we have a suicide, that sounds like something. Yeah. I just don't think that we talk that way.
No.
I mean, like if I've just walked in on my best friend and he says, there's blood everywhere.
Yeah.
So, well, there wasn't blood everywhere. But, he says that. So you would be, I don't know what's happened. Come quick, whatever.
Please
it wouldn't
here.
it wouldn't be we have a suicide. No. I mean, to me, it was just the way it's worded. It sounds almost military or almost law enforcement.
Yeah, that's what I think too, is like officers would say that to each other, like we have a suicide. Totally. Or it's very bizarre. It's a bizarre way to, I think any sort of natural response would not include those words. And also, how do you know that he's deceased at that time? If he had shot himself, then perhaps there's a chance to resuscitate him, or he may not have his injury may not.
It's just 100% sure already.
Exactly. It's just like, odd. This is what it is. And that's what he's reporting. And then before we get into Whitley's statement to police, let's talk about the real events that happened leading up to the police arriving to the scene, because the police don't arrive for a while, according to a lot of different things in the evidence and forensics, but also they called family members. Dylan had family members come to the scene. We just kind of just loosely kind of explain that, what happened there.
Well, just going by phone records, I mean, at 3:30, they start using Christian's phone and making multiple phone calls. There's 6 or 7 phone calls to Matt Miller, which is, Whitley calling Matt. There's a phone call, I think, to Dylan's mother. So, I mean, there's multiple phone calls.
And keep in mind, guys, for listeners, they didn't call 911 until 4:45.
Right. So no one has ever given an explanation of why you're making all these phone calls at 3:30 on Christian's phone, and then on Dylan on his own phone, but then you don't call for an hour and 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
And so, that was a huge deal, but nobody's ever asked them. I mean, law enforcement never said, what went on for an hour and 15 minutes or, longer. As time went by and we had a forensic pathologist and different people to get involved, we realized that the state of rigor that Christian was in was so advanced that, he's saying that he would have had to have been killed as soon as he walked in the door, 11:30, 12 o'clock. The EMTs have backed up that he was in advanced stages of rigor. Lagoy, the police detective that was first on scene, he has said that, it was obvious that the time of death and things did not occur as they said they occurred. We know that family members arrived before or just as the police were there. There was numerous family members, Dylan's mother, Dylan's grandfather, Dylan's mother's boyfriend, Whitley's mother, Whitley's aunt,
which is just bizarre. Yeah. It just makes no sense.
Well, it's bizarre. And then you have to think, and what, again, kind of makes me really sad or upset about it is that, nobody was there for Christian. This was all these people, all these family members that were not against him because at that time, but they'll later become against him.
Right.
And so he had nobody there that was for him, and nobody called us. All these family members, everybody, and nobody said, well, we need to tell Christian's mother. We need to tell her father. If you don't like me, well, everybody liked Todd. I mean, you call Todd. I mean, everybody gets along with Todd.
It was different back then, too. I mean, why wouldn't you have that concern for your friend? I mean, it shows their intentions were to bring people in to help them and protect them. Their concerns were about themselves and not Christian.
Right. And so they were there, and they kept that hidden for a long time. It was never mentioned in a police narrative that there was family members there. Yeah, it was never, it was really by chance that we found out that they were there. And then when you started asking, it became more and more people that we found out, had kind of congregated there, I guess, waiting until, to see what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go through just some of the immediate events that happened, once the police arrived to the apartment. So a police officer arrives, finds Whitley crying inside. When he goes to check the bathroom, he finds Christian again lying over the tub with a gunshot wound on the right side of his head. The officer called another detective, which you just referenced, to the apartment. EMTs and the other detective arrived at 5:08 p.m. and the coroner arrived at 5:28 p.m. They found a decocked gun inside the bathroom, which was really odd for a supposed suicide case. Why is a gun cocked? They also saw that Christian's arms and legs were sitting outside the tub, but his head and upper body were inside of the tub. And the gun was wedged between the bathtub and his left thigh. There was a bullet encasing in the bathtub as well. But Christian was right-handed, right?
Right.
So this physically doesn't make any sense.
Why would it be under his thigh for one, but
and how
his upper thigh? There'd be no way possible for that to happen. There was also Police Chief Lee, who actually lived in Christian's apartment complex. And at the time of Christian's death, he wasn't on duty. Some people at the scene reported seeing Chief Lee there. However, there's no official record of this, and he was not recording using a body cam, but he was at the scene from all accounts, correct?
Correct.
So allegedly, after about 40 minutes of police work, Chief Lee came down to the scene and told them to shut it down. And never once did they even consider that this is potentially a crime scene. They didn't treat it as such. I mean, there's people everywhere. And I mean, just when you heard that he just said, shut it down, what did you think about this?
Well, again, we didn't find out about that till later, till he was actually gone. It was the short period of time after that he was asked to leave, and he, moved from Meridian. So it wasn't until the next police chief, Dubose told us that. I went and met with Chief Lee just maybe 2 weeks after this occurred, and of course that was never mentioned. And just basically was asking him to please investigate. At this point, I'm new to this world of, investigation. And so I really still thought that the police would do the right thing. I'd never really been involved with law enforcement.
Yeah.
And so, but he was very blunt about that he was not going to investigate, and it was a suicide and end of story, and I needed to go home and accept it. It was pretty much what he told me.
I'm sure it was at that point that you realized that the police were not going to help you in this. And just, is that when you kind of realize I'm going to have to take this on myself and try to get to the bottom of what happened?
Yes. I mean, that's when we started kind of sitting down and trying to think about what we needed to do and, kind of what direction. But again, we didn't really know what we were doing. Mm-hmm. We can look back now and think of all the things we should have done.
Right.
Yeah.
But at that time, we were just kind of stumbling around in the dark and hoping that this person was going to be honest and do the right thing. And, and then they wouldn't do the right thing. And then we'd go on to the next person. Mm-hmm. And it was probably, it was probably 6-9 months before it finally just really sunk in that nobody's going to do anything. I mean, we're going to have to take, on all of them, because nobody's going to do anything.
There was no investigation. I mean, they literally didn't even question anybody. They took statements from Whitley and Dylan, which I read through Dylan's statement. I'll read through Whitley's here in a second, but they didn't interview anybody formally, didn't have any sort of, sit down with them and let's actually see if timelines match up, see if you can catch them in their lies. And they had a lot of time to get their story straight and to sort of, try to line things up in a way that to them made sense. But ultimately the police completely just failed. I failed at their job, quite honestly. I mean, to come in and just say, this is a suicide, wrap it up. and that's it. It's just absurd. I mean, in any other situation, I think there's enough suspicion, and if you just sat down and questioned them and talked to the people who were there before the police got there, to Whitley and Dylan, that it would be very apparent early on that we need to do some more digging and we need to investigate this further, because this just doesn't make sense. And obviously the forensics speak for themselves. And let's talk about the forensics just for a moment, because there was none done on the scene initially by police at all. They virtually did nothing to even make sure that the suicide narrative even fits with the scene. There's a gun, Christian's dead, that's suicide. And there's just so many things that don't make sense, which we just referenced. But what things stuck out to you the most?
Well, I mean, they didn't even, going back to what you said about not investigating, they didn't even get that picture that you had of him at the bank. I mean, I went down there and got the picture at the bank. They didn't pull the audio. They didn't pull the video, whatever. And I gave them that picture. And then to add insult to injury, probably a year later, they asked me, could they get another copy of it, because they couldn't find the copy I had given them. Wow. So they, I think the biggest thing to me as far as why they should have viewed it as something other than a suicide was the fact that he went and tried to get his money out of the bank. You had it on camera, and the gun
right.
being decocked and on the wrong side.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that, and again, there was some police work done later on from some of the Meridian detectives, but I mean, just from having no law enforcement background at all, and I think most people, when you actually see crime scene photos and you look what the bathroom looked like, it just doesn't make sense at all. There's clearly tampering. There's clearly stuff was moved, stuff was taken. I mean, the position of the body makes no sense.
You were telling us earlier about the door. Josh realized that the door wouldn't have been able to be opened, or it would have actually moved his feet.
Right. I mean, again, as time goes on and you think and think and think, and you come up with other things, and Josh is very analytical. And he took the picture of the bathroom, the picture that has Christian, over the bathtub in the bathroom, and he counted the number of floor tiles, and where Christian's feet were on the floor tiles, and then made a diagram of the bathroom, and then the swing of the door. The door would not have been able to have been opened. I mean, we've always said the door was open to begin with, because it would have pushed his feet to the side.
Right.
So that when, they found him, his feet would have been to the side. Also, one of his feet is kind of propped up on the other foot, and that would have knocked it down, So
it almost looks propped, like somebody propped him up. To be in that position naturally, if it was, a suicide, it would be impossible to end up like that. And then the bullet itself too, that made no sense to me. That the bullet and casing are in the tub. Clearly somebody moved that. It wasn't where it should have been. I mean, there's just so many things. And then to not even do a blood spatter analysis or even try to confirm that it was a suicide by actually taking the forensic measurements and testing and all of these other things that we have available to,
or to see if there was any cleanup, and they clearly would have had the time. I mean, if it's true based on rigor that he passed sometime between 11, 12, something like that, they would have had plenty of time to do several different things. And we know that they did. I mean, the police knew from Dylan's statement that he had cleared the bank account, and that didn't seem to be an issue for them or strike them as a huge red flag. I mean, in any other case, that would just stand out immediately and you'd question their story. Also, I wanted to kind of go over, Christian had never seemed suicidal to any of your family. To Taylor, his best friend, had never heard anything like that. In fact, he had made statements to you in the past that, because he had witnessed another friend, not witnessed, but he had been around when someone had committed suicide, and he told you, I would never do that. So when you heard this news, was it something that you couldn't even process? It didn't even make any sense?
Yeah, I think that, the first couple of days or whatever, I mean, you're just dealing with your child's gone.
Right.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? You're not even really, I mean, looking back, I must have immediately, you know, kind of started setting things in motion because I called my brother and told him go and get his phone. I mean, this was the night of. I said, because she's going to take his phone.
Yeah.
And sure enough, she had his phone.
So
I said,
something
make
was
sure.
there.
Yeah, I said, make sure that you get his phone. Make sure you get the keys to his Jeep, the keys to his car, and you know, and she had his phone and lied about it, lied to police and said she didn't have it. But I mean, it just immediately again when kind of the shock wears off. I mean, it's never been a suicide to me, and it's not because you know people try to say, well, she's just a mother and she doesn't want to accept her child killed himself. Yeah. You know, some people will say it's because that I'm to blame. But that was just never in, I mean, was Christian struggling in that relationship? Sure. You know, did he have a lot going on in his life he was dealing with? Again, no question. Did he have things going on that I didn't even know about? Again, no question he did. But he's just not the type to give up. I mean, he had future orientation. He was making plans. I mean, that morning, I had called him and we talked about going to a concert. You know, he said, let me check my schedule. I'll get back with you, see what days, you know, I can go.
He's planning to go back to the boat.
Right. I mean, I would think that if you had that in your mind, you wouldn't have gone to the trouble. Well, and knowing Christian, he wouldn't have left them short, if that makes sense. Like, knowing he wasn't going to come back meant that guy was going to be stuck.
Right.
And if he had been thinking of something like that, he would have just said, I'm quitting, I'm not coming back. Because then they would have known he's not coming back. But he didn't do that. He made plans. I'll be back by this time. You know, the reason why he didn't get Justin to come get him was because, you know, Justin was home on his 2 weeks. Christian knows how important that 2 weeks is to you. And he, you know, it was like, I don't want to pull you away from your family.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's only for 6 hours or 9 hours or whatever. So, you know, he thought about how things impacted other people and he didn't just think about himself. And so I just, you know, that just never entered my mind. And then the fact that we had that conversation and he had said, you know, if anybody ever says I killed myself, you come looking, Mom, because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it was just too many things. And then just knowing, I mean, I obviously was very suspicious of Whitley because I had somebody watching the apartment. That's not a normal mom thing to do. I will admit that. Did I think that he would end up dead over that? No, that never entered my mind. But I, you know, I had a lot of concern about the relationship. You know, I felt that she was very dangerous in a different way to him.
Yeah.
You know, again, I never in my mind to that extent.
Yeah.
It was more, you know, I didn't like seeing people taking advantage of him. I didn't like knowing that he was working and sacrificing as far as being gone from home for so long periods of time. And then, you know, you're being treated this way.
Right.
And it is causing you a lot of distress. You know, you should have somebody who, you know, they're at home waiting for you.
Yeah, you deserve it.
You're right. And that you don't, that's one less worry on your mind.
Yeah.
You know, because Christian was very young to be in the position he was in. And, you know, I really didn't know the responsibility he had in his job. And we had gone out to eat, just he and I, one day. And I said something about having to terminate somebody. And I said, I hate terminating people. And I said, I usually just put up with their behavior as long as I can because I don't want, you know, to have to fire somebody. And he was like, oh, I do it all the time. And I mean, he was 20 at this time. And I'm like, what?
A lot.
And he said, I mean, I have to fire men all the time. And he said, some of them are 30 and 40 years old. He said, how do you think I feel? I'm sitting here 20 years old telling a 35-year-old, you got to go, get off the boat.
That's got to be really hard.
So, you know, I didn't, you know, realize a lot of the responsibilities that he had that, again, a 20-year-old wasn't usually, and when you're one of the youngest people on the boat and everybody else is a lot older than you and does have a family and does have kids and everything, it, you know, it does put him in a kind of a difficult situation sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to circle back to Whitley's statement to police because it also makes no sense and it's a lot shorter than Dylan's was actually. So again, police just ask them for statements. This is not like a formal questioning or anything like that. They're just allowed to tell their story of what happened from their perspective. And this is what Whitley said. So Whitley told police that she went to a Mardi Gras party with her family on the night of the 22nd, and Christian had stopped talking to her that day around 1 when he left for his hitch. They didn't talk for 2 days, and when she finally got a hold of him, he said that he didn't want Whitley going out without him. Whitley said that they had a lot of trust issues, and she debated whether or not to break up with him. On the night of the 25th, Christian told her he was coming home and quitting his job. Whitley said they needed to talk and work things out. But didn't his boat mom, Cheryl, say that he was going back to end things with Whitley? That was what she had heard him say to her, that he was going to go home to end things. The morning of the 26th, Christian came home early, and he and Whitley went for a ride. Christian told her that he couldn't make anyone happy, including her and his mom. They came home, and Whitley took a nap with her dog in their bedroom. Dylan woke her up and told her Christian was dead.
Yeah, let's just stop there for a second. First of all, I think it's strange that the first day that he's home and they have all this turmoil going on, that she would choose to take a nap. That just seems like an odd activity for her to be spending her time doing.
It's too convenient. It's just a nap is such a like easy way to be like, oh, well, I wasn't aware of anything, right?
It's out of reality. Yeah.
It's a way to remove yourself from, what's actually happening.
Meanwhile, according to them, there is a gunshot, and how on earth is she going to sleep through that gunshot? I mean, that's just been questioned by so many people. So many experts have said there is just no way that she wouldn't have heard that and wouldn't have woken up. For her to just be woken up by Dylan, and then the phone call, I mean, to go straight into that is just the way it plays out, and the way they've tried to have it play out is just so suspicious.
His gun was a .45 caliber too, which is that's a pretty large pistol. So you would hear that gunshot a couple apartments down. I mean, that's
absolutely
a loud sound that's going off. And again, people say, well, she was on Xanax, so perhaps the Xanax kept her asleep. But then again, Dylan was if she was in such a deep Xanax slumber, then why was Dylan able to wake her up so quickly?
It's hard to believe, even especially with how much she seemed to take Xanax. She was used to it. It's not like this was her first time ever being
exactly. Yeah. That's a great point. That probably had some tolerance to it. But anyway, she says she went upstairs and she found, quote unquote, the love of her life face down in a bathtub, quote unquote, swooshed up into a puddle of blood. She said she hugged Christian's waist and held his hand, and she thought Christian killed himself because he thought she didn't love him back. Whitley also said that she was on Xanax at the time of the incident. That's why she slept through the gunshot. And the detective asked Whitley if Christian had ever talked about hurting himself, and Whitley said that she didn't think so. So, I mean, she even says herself that
there's no one that has said that Christian ever told them that he was, considering that or would hurt himself or, harm himself in any way, let alone actually take his life.
So I want to ask you, and just because this is a theory that's put out there by some people in the Meridian Police Department too, that perhaps this wasn't suicide, it wasn't homicide. Is it possible this was accidental? Based on what Dylan says, he was holding the gun to his head. Is it possible he accidentally shot himself? I'm curious to know what you think of that.
Well, I think that again, it goes back to, if it was an accident, then why didn't they call the police and say an accident occurred?
Yeah.
Why lie about that?
But you stage a scene. You still are having to position a gun and do things. And I just always go back to the thing of why lie. If it is as straightforward as whatever, why lie? And every single person involved in this has lied about numerous things. And that can be a proven fact. That's not my opinion or my whatever. It can be proven with phone records or with, just different conflict and stories that's been told. And no, I've never really thought that was, I do know that there is several that have put that out there. But again, I think that their narrative has had to change to fit the forensics that came out. It went from he was leaning over the bathtub and he shot himself. And then when forensics came out that negated that, then it was, he was sitting on the commode and there was a struggle over the gun. Then it became, then why did he end up like this. And then their next thing was, well, not because Whitley was hugging him, that he fell over into the bathtub. And it doesn't, every theory they come out with doesn't explain, why you waited 4 hours, 5 hours to call the police, call 911. Why, all the different things.
Why'd you go to the bank?
Why'd you call your family members?
I think, and the more I've thought about it too, I'm like, there's just the actions after the shooting occurs, the actions afterwards don't make any sense or line up with the accidental theory. Because again, if it was accidental, that must have been shocking for both of them to witness that. If that's what had happened,
they would have said something.
You would have reacted differently, and your events most likely would have changed had that been the case, right? You would have, the 911 call probably would have been different. It would have been, there would have been, my friend accidentally shot himself, as opposed to
more backstory.
Or we don't know what happened.
Right, we don't know what happened. We just came in there and this is what we found, and just. There's clearly other motives there too. Going to try to withdraw money from the account and just some of the other things. I think, like you said, it really comes down to why lie about something like that. Like, do you think, is it possible they're thinking that if they don't lie about this, then are they going to be held for other crimes that they may have committed after the accidental shooting occurred? Moving him or it's taking things from him, and that's why they're trying to. But then again, it's like, that's much more serious. You're only incriminating yourself more if you come out and say that. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, based on forensics, if you go strictly by forensics and what that shows, it makes whatever happened and whoever, pulled the trigger, whoever you want to say, it makes it in my opinion, a very sick, devious act, because they went and got food and brought food back and ate, and who does that? Who they sat around. If you really put yourself like thinking, okay, I'm sitting in this apartment and this has happened, they sat there and they had to clean up. And if this is really the love of your life and your best friend, you had to have moved him a couple of times probably. You had to, you know what I'm saying? To know that you
that alone
took rags or washcloths or whatever. And even if it was a total stranger, that would be hard to do.
Right.
But this is somebody who, that you knew, who, you've been in a relationship with.
Who's been so generous to you. And then to go and steal from him.
Right. So, when you put yourself in that mindset, that's what makes me think that, it takes a really calculating person to do that. Even again, if it was an accident. Even if it was an accident, how can it be and sit there and say that you did all those things?
Right.
And you came up with a story. And then you not only did all that, but then you turned around and accused the family. If I had done something like that and I had come up with this story, I would have stayed quiet, not pointed any fingers, and played poor, poor family. Yeah. I'm so sorry for them. Yeah. They did just the opposite.
Smart. Yeah.
They were very vindictive. They were
defensive.
very,
And why?
Right.
Unless you have something to hide or.
And so everything that would be considered normal behavior to me, they did the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And, the picking on Alexa, the just really bullying her really over the years.
Yeah. Can you explain that a little more?
Well, just, after all of this, again, this is when they didn't even really know that we were investigating, because for the first couple of years, other than going to the police department, a lot of people didn't know that we were continuing to push and push and push. And, Whitley would get some of her friends to text Alexa or to harass her and it's your fault your brother killed himself. It's we had to press charges on and get a restraining order on someone because, she was in the middle of the lake swimming, and they come up and start telling her that Christian, killed himself because of her. He didn't love her. And this went on for years, not that it should have ever gone on, but it wasn't just like immediately. It was like this went on for a long time. And, I think it shaped Alexa when you're young and you have all this, you become very, you either have to do one or two things. You either have to become a very, cower. You have to kind of cower down,
isolate,
or you had to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
And Alexa took, she fought back, and she would give it back to them if they said something, So I think it made her into this kind of confrontational female that she gets sometimes criticized for, but I think that shaped her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, how can it not? I mean, that's just such a big thing. Like, what was it like when you were out to dinner, right? When you got the news?
We just were told something bad had happened.
Right? That's right. Yeah.
We didn't know. I mean, we, even then we didn't think like somebody died. We were just thinking they'd been hurt.
Yeah. We got to get home.
They just said something bad has happened. And we were kind of going through the kids. Well, we know it's not Alexa. She's at church. It was a Wednesday night and she was at church. And, we really was worried it was Josh, because Josh had not been working on the boat for very long. We knew he was out on the boat. We knew Christian was out on the boat. And so I had talked to Christian that morning. And so we were afraid that Josh had been hurt on the boat. So we went, all the way to Delwood, and they had contacted my husband's father instead of us.
Right.
And so he was calling us, telling us, you need to come home, but he didn't want to tell us over the phone what had happened. And then, when he told me there at his house, I mean, I literally stood up, got my purse and said, we're going to the house. They don't know what they're talking about, because I had talked to Christian that morning and he was in New Orleans. And I even said, it's just some boy that Alexa, that Whitley had at the apartment. I mean, I just thought that, quite frankly, she was messing around with some guy at the apartment and somebody shot him. Somebody shot him. And because he was at their apartment, they just thought it was Christian. Yeah. Because, they didn't give us any details. It's not like they said that Whitley was there. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's not like they said,
what was actually going on at the scene. Yeah.
Then the police came to our house and told us, and I told them the same thing. I said, it's not him. I said, he's on the boat. And then they gave me his driver's license and said, is this your son? And even then, I sent Chris. I called Chris and said, go to the apartment and see if this is Christian. I don't think this is Christian. So, I'm sure a lot of that was denial after seeing the driver's license. But it was just a lot of, I think immediately, because of the relationship, I thought something had gone wrong. Something was not right as far as them saying it was a suicide.
So then Chris goes down to the police station where Dylan and Whitley were taken to give their statements, because like you said earlier, you wanted Chris to get the phone and the car keys, so Whitley wouldn't take off with them. The police told Christian's uncle, Chris, that they didn't have the keys or Christian's phone, but he could go back to the apartment and look for them. Chris didn't want to, and he asked them if it was still a crime scene. The police said no, and that they were done there, which I'm sure Chris was like, what do you mean you're done there already? The police were able to give Christian's uncle the BMW keys, but when they asked for the phone, Whitley told police she didn't know where it was. Christian's uncle wasn't going to leave until he had the phone back, and when the police told Whitley she couldn't leave until they got it back, that's when Whitley reached into her purse and handed over the phone. So already lying, just consistently lying from the very moment that this all happens. But the coroner determined that Christian's cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, and his time of death was 3:45 p.m., but the manner of death was listed as undetermined instead of homicide or suicide. And it was the next day that the medical examiner ruled his death a suicide. The next day after this happened. That's good. So they had it undetermined for less than 24 hours before they just said it was a suicide. What information did you have at that point when you found out that did you find out that the coroner had ruled it undetermined initially, or did you find that out later?
Not immediately. I mean, it was probably 3 or 4 weeks before we found out, I think. And it may have been a little earlier, but I mean, it wasn't immediately. And autopsy report, we got about 4, 5, 6 weeks afterwards, because it took a little bit for them to get the report. And, she had in there, he had a history of depression. And so that immediately caused us, my thing was, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
Because number one, he didn't have a history of depression. He had never been on antidepressants. He had never been to counseling. He had never voiced to anybody that he was suicidal. And how would she know that anyway? I mean, other than doing a tox screen and an antidepressant showing up in your system, which there was none.
There's no way to pull that information.
So, and we still don't know where she got. I mean, of course, the theory is that she went by Whitley's statement, where Whitley said that he had a history of depression and,
heard it somewhere and just wrote it into the report.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's almost too convenient to just put that in there. And then the very next day, change it to suicide when there's so many other things that weren't even examined prior to determine that it was a suicide.
Well, and I mean, I think that in my opinion, someone do an autopsy, whatever, forensic pathologist should not, he died of a gunshot wound to his head. That's his cause of death.
Right.
His cause of death, again, how can she determine it? And that was, Dr. Arden, who is the forensic pathologist we got, that was his argument. He said, she can't say who pulled the trigger. All she can say is he died of a gunshot wound to the head.
Right.
And
an autopsy won't show who pulled the trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
And unless you have just flat out proof, there was a note or something, whatever. And there was a case that same pathologist did that went to trial, which similar situation, except it was the female that was shot. And she testified, and it was a couple of years after Christian's death. And I had wondered if she had learned anything, because she testified that all she could say was it was a gunshot wound to the head. And it was a very similar situation. But in that situation, the victim actually had a history of suicide attempts and was on antidepressants. And but in her situation, her cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head.
Wow. Yeah. So majorly inconsistent there. How did you guys find Dr. Arden?
Well, I initially tried to get Dr. Biden, but he is a very difficult man to get in touch with.
Really?
And yes, and not very pleasant when I did get in touch with him, because he's so well known. Is why I knew that he was like the leading authority. But I think that I just Googled a list of the top forensic pathologists in the United States, and I wanted it to be like one of the top, one of the best, so that nobody could question the results.
Right. Yeah.
And he was in the top 10. And so then when we looked into his resume, as far as, he had been the medical examiner in Washington, D.C., and he did the sniper shooting there, and he worked on some very high-profile cases and been the medical examiner. I thought that, and he was just very well respected. And so we contacted him, and he actually, I never spoke to Dr. Arden, which I think is a good thing in that he wants to keep it a layer.
Yeah, independent from...
He doesn't want to get involved with the family's emotions, which I totally... Because what if he says something we don't like, you know?
Yeah.
So he only communicates through the attorney.
Good for him.
And I totally respected that. And so, Cynthia, our attorney, contacted him, and he agreed to take the case. And then, there were a couple of conference calls which we could sit in on, but she had to be there, and so he discussed his findings and everything. But he was a very nice guy.
Mm-hmm. And so one thing he's been absolutely adamant about, and he stated in the most recent coverage, which was the 48 Hours episode, is that he's confident that the scene was staged. What are the other things that he has come to find by looking over everything that stand out to you? We have a couple written down here, but what was most telling about his report to you?
Well, the most telling would be the rigor, the advanced stages of rigor, which, kind of gives you a timeline.
Yeah.
And you can, there's no way, that doesn't lie. The temperature of a room or something like that could slightly, but not enough to, by hours.
To the point to where it was at.
And when I say slightly, we're talking minutes, not hours.
So without a shadow of a doubt, we know that the time of death had to be earlier than they reported it.
Right. Yeah. He said 12 o'clock was pushing it for it to be in that level, that state,
even
advanced state.
Yeah. So probably earlier.
Right. And then the lividity that was, on because you have to be in that position. It has to be in contact with something for the blood to settle in that area. And so he had lividity on his back, and a place on his back, and then on his calf, which would mean he would have had to have been on his back.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some point for, not just a short period of time, but a significant period of time. So, those two things were really the most telling.
Yeah, because it doesn't lie. It proves that his body was moved, and it proves that the events that Whitley and Dylan said happened are untrue, and that things happened on a totally different timeline than what was given to police. And had police actually investigated, what had actually occurred that day, they would have maybe, I don't know what their skill set, I don't know if they would ever came to the right conclusion, but the timeline would have been dramatically different than what was actually reported and what they put into the actual case file, and time of death and all these other things that don't match up with what the people who are last with him said. And at that point, there's your investigation. I mean, that gives you all you need to know to go and figure out what actually happened. They're lying about the timeline. Well, why are they lying about the timeline? Why aren't we digging deeper to figure out what actually happened? And that's just the most mind-blowing thing about all of this, is that they didn't even get anywhere near to getting that point. They had already, and I'm just like, why? Like, why did they not? Do you think it's sheer incompetence of the police department, or do you think it was Chief Lee and what he did at the scene that stopped all of this? It's hard to wrap your head around.
Well, the only reason why I think it's not sheer incompetence is because in the narrative with LaGoy that Arrington did, LaGoy says in that interview, LaGoy was the first officer there, that the time of death wasn't right. Well, it didn't line up with the story that Whitley and them was telling. And that he states that there's advanced stage of rigor, and he states that the blood is drying around the bathtub.
Yeah.
And so, all that takes time. And so this couldn't have been something that happened in the last 45 minutes or hour,
Like basic knowledge.
Right.
That, yeah.
And so it makes me think that they were told not to do anything, but because it's like he noticed all this stuff and he questioned it himself, but he didn't follow through, because I guess, number one, he wasn't assigned the case. But then also, it just seems like everybody was told to stop, don't do anything.
They thought it was just exactly what it appeared, I guess, to, I'm just like, why stop though? Why'd they stop? Like what was that force that made them stop, and why?
Well, no one knows for sure. But some ideas.
Yeah, and again, I don't know that it was incompetence. Not to say, I'm not saying they're the most competent, but I don't know that it was just utter
sheer,
competence. I think it was more that there was someone behind the scenes that wanted it to be a suicide and didn't want it to be looked into and determined to be anything but a suicide.
Right. So the police did not do any luminol testing. However, Knox and Associates, which is a group that does crime scene reconstructions, actually did, and they picked up blood that looked like it had been cleaned up.
Right.
Which would make total sense.
And you guys paid for it and had them come in, right?
Right. I mean, we made the police department aware because I really wanted them to be involved so that they would, feel like they were part of the process, and they couldn't sit there and go, oh, well, they probably didn't do it right, or they didn't, there'd be some way to discount it. And I, made them aware. Well, I first asked them if they would do it. I mean, they said that if they would get someone who knew what they were doing.
Right.
And they said, no, they didn't have that in their budget, that they would just get somebody on, to go down there and do it,
Right. Watch a YouTube video and figure out.
And it was kind of like, but have you ever done this before?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, no, but, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, no, because then I can't trust the findings. And so I told them, I will pay for this and get these people to come. They knew all about them. They had talked to them, told them, this is the day they're going to be there. This is the time. I'd like for somebody to be there from the police department. They said that they would check with their supervisor to see if they could come, and then nobody showed up or wasn't present. I mean, Knox and Associates did the testing, and those results were given to the police department.
But it was just, there was no response from the police department at all. Did they even acknowledge that you had given them the report?
Nobody's ever commented as far as from law enforcement.
Wow.
On the
maddening.
That's actually probably around the time their story kind of changed about what happened, because it had to. I mean, that's what I'm saying, that their narrative changed. I mean, they were dead set that Christian shot himself over the bathtub. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. Here's the ricochet of the bullet, which didn't make sense, and here's whatever. then as things would come out, it'd be like, oh, well, yeah, this is what happened.
So they would respond in that way. They'd be like, oh, well, now that they wouldn't say this, but now that we've seen this report and this evidence, they're like, we've got to kind of alter things internally to make it make sense with this new information.
I mean, it was always, I can understand one coincidence. I know there's going to be things that happen that nobody can explain, but in Christian's case, there's multiple cases that things cannot be explained. Right. And so you can't have that many coincidences, even with the gun. Trent Weeks with MBI, he said, well, the gun malfunctions sometimes. That's why the gun was decocked. Well, actually, that gun rarely malfunctions, and I've spoken to numerous gun collectors and people who are very familiar with that gun, and they say it's one of the most reliable guns there is. But let's just say it did malfunction. How did it get over to the left side?
Right. Why is it in that position?
So, I mean, now you got two anomalies, and then it became some kind of explanation that wasn't even physically possible. Well, it bounced off the floor and bounced up. Well, I mean, it's not a trampoline floor. I mean, it's not going to just bounce up off a heavy gun.
Right.
It was always some kind of excuse about why, this rarely happens, but it happened this time. So.
Which is too convenient to accept. I mean, so the case is closed too, and that doesn't help that you're submitting. Was there anybody actively you were communicating with at the police department on the case, or was it like when you were submitting the Knox Associates report and stuff? Was there somebody you were giving this to that was like, I'll add it to the case file, or I'll show it to the right people?
At that time, Jerry Bratto, he had been hired to do cold cases.
Okay.
And so he was the one that I was communicating with. And then after him, it was Arrington was assigned. And he was the last person who, he doesn't work for the Marine Police Department anymore, but he was the last person who actually actively worked on it.
Okay. So they were reviewing the reports that you were giving them.
Well, they were getting them. I don't know if they were reviewing them, and they were making them into the file because Knox's report and the Luminol photo was in the case file. So, they received them, they had them.
Okay. So since we were talking about the gun, let's kind of go back and let's talk about
gun night
and just what the police did. So the police decided to test Christian, Whitley, and Dylan for gunshot residue, GSR. But before they even tested Whitley, she told them, I'm going to test positive for gunshot residue. And the reason she said this was because the night before, she had shot off some guns into the woods with her friends, Jet, Matt, and Zach. And like I just said, this night has been known as gun night ever since.
Where did that term come from, gun night?
I think Culpable kind of termed it gun night because I think that's what they named their episode, Gun Night.
Oh, okay. I see. So, and now it's possible that other people were there outside of those people we just mentioned as well.
Right. Not necessarily that participated in shooting guns, but was at the house. That has come out that at least one other person has been named, and, we still think there was another person there.
Okay.
So can you say it's confirmed that gun night occurred, or is it still where we can't prove either way?
Let's just say we know gun night did not occur like they say it occurred.
Okay.
But you don't think it was something that was just made up to cover for the gunshot residue?
I don't know. No, I'm not going to say that. I do think it could be a made up story. To say,
really
I'll have gunshot residue on my hands.
Because they all came back positive.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We don't know if she had shot a gun at gun night or not officially.
Because Matt told the police that Whitley did not shoot the gun that night. But Jeff said she did. She says she did. So it's just kind of been this
There's a
thing
lot of conflicting
Which
information.
Would have been great if there was more questioning about all of that to begin with.
Right.
I also just wanted to clarify what Culpable is. It's another podcast that did an excellent job covering the case, worked extensively with you. They've had even more episodes come out recently with more up-to-date information, kind of more speculative, going over things. So we'll have that linked below. Those guys are great.
They also dive into a lot more, like a lot of the names that we're naming here, they dive into a lot more detail. And there's a lot of interviews with specific people that are mentioned throughout our episode here. So, if you really want to dive into this deep, Culpable is a great place to take a look at, their podcast, and they go into everything in a lot more depth and detail. I think there's like 20 plus hours of content there. So we'll put that out there for you guys.
Yeah, we did have someone to look at who is kind of an expert in, I guess, trace evidence type things. And he brought up the point that, but I mean, there's no dispute that there was gunshot residue on Christian's hands because he was there. No matter who shot the gun, he was there. And he was saying that some of the particles that show up that would be in gunshot residue also are found in like his line of work. Like you have some of those same particles. And so, because his hands were dirty, his hands were so dirty that it took them a long, long time to do the gunshot residue on his hands. I had somebody that kept checking with him, like, has it come back? Has it come back? And he even sent back and said, what kind of work did this guy do? Said his hands had a lot of dirt, whatever, particles, and it's causing us to have to take us much longer, which actually is even a point to do back to the thing of things not seeming right is, he would not have come in. I mean, he still had his shoes on or his boots. If you were at his apartment for hours.
Watching movies.
Why would you? And going and laying down in bed. You would have taken your boots off. Or, they were dirty. They were whatever. And, probably I had some guys that work on towboats to contact me after the podcast came out. And they were like, the very first thing you do when you get home is take a shower.
Right.
Because you are just, you're usually dirty.
Yeah.
And you haven't been able to get like a good shower or whatever. And they said, that's just one of the first things you do. And he obviously did not. So it's just some things like that you can't really say is forensic evidence.
Yeah.
But it is anomalies.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So a few days after Christian's funeral, Chris went to the sheriff's office and had Christian's phone unlocked. And there were multiple messages sent to Whitley that were pretty hard to read. The texts talk about wanting to commit suicide or express active suicidal ideation. But again, they had possession of Christian's phone. And Dylan, he knew how to jailbreak phones. And especially, years ago, iPhones could be manipulated in many ways. I mean, you could literally replace the operating system on them. You could do all sorts of things to manipulate messages. You could change the backgrounds, the themes, the font. And so, there's a lot of controversy around the text messages and whether or not they actually came from Christian or not. What's kind of your take on them? You feel like they were manipulated and just the way that they were worded and spelling was done just doesn't really line up with Christian and how he would talk?
There's some messages really the last 48 hours on the phone, or really last 24 hours, that are just the punctuation, the grammar used, the wording is just definitely not Christian. You could look at messages he sent and compare them and how he would use a to for, to, or you for you, and just different little things like that he did. And then just punctuation, he usually didn't even punctuate. Just one sentence ran into another sentence, and you just had to learn how to read, his text. I mean, there were times when he would text me that I would have to call him and go, "What are you trying to say?" Because this, I don't understand what you're trying to say. But then there are some weird things with the phone records. Like once we got his phone records and, her phone records and Dylan's phone, everybody's phone records, there's just some weird, I can't say. Someone that has a lot of IT background, I guess, could, there's just like things like where it looks like it's a 3-way call on her phone, but it's just some weird things.
Yeah.
And that I'm not technologically savvy enough to even know how to explain it. And the people that was looking at it knew much more about it than I did. And they were just like, something's weird here, but we really can't put our finger on what is going on. Because when you get the phone records, there's all these codes and lines of numbers and all this stuff. And it means something to them. It didn't mean anything to me. It's just like I remember sitting down at the police station with Jerry Bratu and telling him, and he agreed with me. I said, even if we say that these messages, Christian wrote them or sent them, I said, it doesn't still doesn't mean that he killed himself. Because I said, you can tell by there's an escalation. He's trying to get a reaction from her. You know, he starts out, well, I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to do this. Okay, well, that didn't get a reaction. Okay, well, then if you don't do this, then I'm going to do this. You know, and then that didn't get. And so, and actually, he was saying all these things. And then it was until the last thing he says, well, I'm going to quit my job and come home. And then she responds to him, you know, when it comes to, I'm going to quit my job. And when we had her phone records to look at that and know that, you know, she was turning her locations off and taking her SIMS card out, and there'd be no activity on her phone for 4 hours. And then, during the gun night time period, you know, she has her SIMS card out of her phone and is using Wi-Fi because he won't know her location with that 360, whatever it is on iPhones. And so, I mean, it's obvious that she's taking her SIMS card in and out so that he does not know where she is. But yet you leave your SIMS card in when you're at Matt Miller's.
Yeah.
You want him to know you're at Matt Miller's all night. But on gun night, you don't want him to know where you are.
Yeah.
So there's very odd activity on her phone more so than on Christian's phone that raises a lot of questions about the messages on his phone, if that makes sense. That may not be a very good explanation, but it's almost like her records are more damning than his to back up that something weird was going on.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So 2 weeks after Christian's death, Josh actually went back to the apartment and he said it was a mess. There were holes in the wall, empty beer cans everywhere, cigarette butts that had been put out on the floor, and it was totally trashed. And the police actually left the cleanup of the scene to you guys, and Josh actually cleaned up the scene, which is just...
I think that's very shocking to most people. They would just think that'd be a standard thing for police to take care of that. And there are companies that can come and help with that, but Josh decided to do it for himself, which I'm sure was totally traumatic. And when he left the apartment, it was totally spotless. So he must have just been shocked by the condition that it was in when he came back.
And I think he talked to you, Josh, didn't he?
Yeah.
Because Josh is very reserved, as y'all know, from being at the house. And I think that you and he kind of bonded a little bit. And, you know, that was a decision that he made. We were going to get someone to clean up, and he just insisted. He said he didn't want anybody else seeing it. And again, Josh is a very analytical person. And
honestly, good thing he did.
Well, really it is, because even though I hate that he did, it's a good thing he did, because, I mean, I think sitting in that bathroom, running it over and over in his head, what the police was trying to say happened, and he's the one who came to me and said, you need to get a ballistic expert, because there's just no way this happened the way they're saying it happened. And of course, that's kind of set in motion us getting the first set of investigators, or I guess it'd be the second actually. But, Josh doesn't say much, but I think all the time it's kind of running in his mind. And it might be a month later and he'll come up and say, well, what about this? His thing to me was Christian wouldn't want anybody else to see that. And he felt it was important for him to kind of protect Christian in that way.
I have mad respect for Josh and just everything that he did, and just the strength to do that. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. But luckily, going back and doing that process of cleaning up, he actually found more pieces of evidence in the house, because the police, again, never treated it as a crime scene. They took a couple pictures on a phone, right? They used a phone to take pictures of the scene, which is just bizarre. They're all like kind of blurry quality. You can barely see really anything. And also, we had discussed kind of before that there was a magazine for the gun that had actually been moved, right? They said that they took a picture of the magazine on, was it the nightstand? And it had actually been in the bed, which is weird. And it had been moved, and then the picture had been taken. But also in the middle of Christian's bed, it looked like someone had cut into it with a knife and ripped out the cushioning, almost as if, you were looking for something that was hidden in the bed. But Josh also took pictures of some other things in the apartment, including a knife that looked like it had blood on it, a bloody shirt, and also there was some blood spatter that he had seen. And you guys actually took those items and you gave them to the police, and we have no idea whatever happened to them.
Yeah, we gave them at that point. Trent Weeks was assigned with Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. And so Todd met him at the Highway Patrol office and gave him we gave him a notebook that was found in the apartment that was in Whitley's handwriting, where she had written down all of Christian's like date of birth, social security numbers, credit card numbers. She just had a page that had all of his information on it. And then there was the T-shirt that was behind the kind of stuff behind the toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and had a lot of dog hair on it and was inside out. And then there was a knife, and they tested the knife, but they didn't send the knife to the crime lab. They did some kind of in-house test.
Like swab or something? Yeah.
That is supposed to identify it as human blood or animal blood. And they said that it was animal blood. But my thing is, why didn't you send it to the crime lab? And there could have been fingerprints on the gun, on the knife. Attorney General's office, nobody knows where any of that went to.
That's crazy. And I mean, especially when later you find out that, scene was cleaned, guns cleaned, all these different things, and they didn't even bother to test anything else there, because maybe you would have found DNA from whoever else had been there. And I mean, it's weird. The T-shirt behind the toilet's just really bizarre to me. I don't know what that.
There was beer bottles. There was just things that could have very easily been tested for DNA to see
because you
if
could
it was
place that person inside of that bathroom,
right?
If you had tested it for DNA, just so many missteps that happened in this. But Detective Wilburn was assigned to the case, and by that point, they had closed Christian's case, labeled it a suicide. The Meridian Police Department closed the case after investigating Christian's death after only 45 minutes, and they never changed the ruling. Let's talk about the case file and just how that whole process, and we can briefly talk about the autopsy photos too, because that's a big piece of this too. It was difficult to get a hold of the case file initially.
Well, it was difficult to get a hold of anything, and I have been foiling, I can't ever say that word right, City of Meridian for some records, and I was wanting like emails between Chief Lee and Bilbo Mitchell, the DA at the time, just trying to establish if there was communication about Christian's case between any of them. They would send me all the junk mail. They would redact the emails that were pertinent, and they would send me all the junk mail, and I was having to pay like $1 a page for every. So, I spent like over $1,000 on basically nothing. So I had kind of got burnt with that. So I had sent a public records request to Attorney General's office for the case file. And initially they said I couldn't have it. Then they said that I could, but it would be like $967. So I was afraid I was going to get a bunch of nothing and pay $967. So I said, well, can I come there and look and see what you have and then get a copy of it and pay, I'll pay you, but I want to make sure that what I'm getting is pertinent. So I was supposed to set up a meeting with Marvin Sanders, who was the prosecutor who had presented Christian's case at the grand jury. So that was who I was communicating with. In the interim time, I had recorded him talking about the grand jury in a phone conversation he and I had, and where he said that he didn't really know what was in the case file. I had talked about the video they showed of the suicide inside the police station and how that was not, we talked about all of this because he was kind of defending, he was saying we didn't present it as a suicide. And I said, well, you did it. Why did you show this video of someone committing suicide if you're not trying to give the grand jury the perception that you think it's a suicide? And so when he found out that I had that recorded, he quit answering my messages and everything. So I sent numerous emails to him saying, I'm still trying to set up this meeting. Well, in the interim time, they released the case file. And when I say they released it, they gave it to other people. And so when they gave it to them, they gave me a copy. But they gave it to the other people, the two individuals, before I ever got my copy. So, and then they gave it to them for free. They didn't charge them anything when they sent a FOIA. They said, sure, we'll give you the case file.
Yeah.
And so because they gave it to them free, they had to give it to me free. But they did it, in a way, it's not standard procedure for the Attorney General's office to give out a case file. They actually never give out a case file. I even called the Attorney General's office and pretended I was somebody else and said, look, I want my son's case file. And they were like, oh, no, we don't do that. And I was like,
oh, really?
This was after they had released, And I was like, well, no, it's gone to the grand jury. He wasn't indicted. I just want, and they were like, no, ma'am, we don't ever give out a case file.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, well,
interesting.
In my case, you did. Wow.
So for them to give out the case file was very unusual.
Yeah.
And then in the manner that they gave it out and the amount of information that they gave out, like with Christian's phone records, they gave out every text message. Yeah. I mean, that had nothing to do with his death. I mean, nothing to do with days leading up, to his death. I mean, they gave out every message that was on his phone. So it was every message between him and Alexa, between me and him, that had nothing to do with Whitley, or any of it.
Private.
Messages before he had ever even met Whitley.
Right.
So I felt like that was very shady on their part, and I felt like they were just attempting to get us to be silent.
Mm-hmm.
They also included the autopsy photos in that, and it was all the autopsy photos. Mm-hmm. And they made it public record so people could post it on, they posted links on Facebook and on, everywhere. I think we have a message between someone and another person at the Attorney General's office bragging about how that the link to the autopsy photos had been downloaded over 2,000 times.
Oh my God.
Wow. Really?
And so, they were posting links on betting sites, like going to sports betting sites, and, because they knew there was a lot of traffic there, and posting them there. Yeah. And so just anything they could do to have this out, and for why. I mean, it did not prove their point or our point. I mean, so it was just to be vindictive.
Just to hurt you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was very hurtful for your family.
That it still is. Yes, it was probably, I took it harder than anybody else. A lot of the other things that bothered, everybody has their Achilles heel, I guess, and that was mine. Mm-hmm. And so I've never looked at the autopsy photos. I don't know, and I remember Todd calling me and saying, do not click on the link, do not open the, whatever. So I don't know how bad they are, but I know they're bad just from what other people have said.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can just imagine having your child, no matter if he's 20 or 21, naked. Mm-hmm. Number one, it's taking away all dignity. Mm-hmm. Right. And, cut open and for everybody to see.
Yeah.
And it's just, I guess in my mind, I could sit there and see, the people on the other side laughing and making fun and everything. Right. And I just, it really, that has bothered me more than anything. Yeah.
It's just straight evil. There's no reason for it. It's just other than to hurt you and be malicious. And I mean, that's like the most shocking thing about this whole case is the fact that happened and the manner at which it happened. And I mean, I know when we were working on the documentary, when I found this out, I was like, is this real? I couldn't even believe it. And I went out and I started, and I didn't look, but the actual pictures, but I was able to find it fairly easily. And I was like, I can't believe this is out there still. Like and
they bragged about it being out there. Yeah.
And it's like,
it's just so bad and justified, and we don't know why she's upset about this. This is our right to have these pictures. And, you had people and the people who FOIA'd to get it in the first place who specifically said to include autopsy photos, so it was, and you had elected officials whose, family members was pushing, I mean, actually it was an elected official's family member who posted it on a sporting page trying to get people to,
what is wrong with people? I mean,
so it became very political. It became very ugly quickly, as y'all saw when y'all were in Meridian.
Yeah.
But, the good thing that came out of it is it took 2 years, but we got Christian's law done. And so now it's a felony in Mississippi for...
Can they retroactively...
They could have.
Go and
they asked me about that. When I say they, I ended up getting a lobbyist who helped me get it done. And he said, I'm going to tell you, it can be retroactive. But if you try to get it retroactive... you're going to look like you're doing this to be vindictive.
Right.
And there may be a chance that it doesn't get passed because, it's going to look like you're just going after people. Mm-hmm. And that was before we had any idea about the support, we was going to get.
Yeah.
I think I did the right thing to say it wasn't because it was not being done for a vindictive reason. It was being done to protect anybody for it to be happening again. But now that I know how much support we had, I don't know that I would have said, "Oh no, we're going to go." Right. But I will say that it does protect Christian as far as anyone now if they put his picture out. I mean, if they newly posted it or whatever, he would be very proud. He would be very proud. And we didn't think his name was going to be on it. And I would have to say kudos to Nick Bain and several other representatives that. When I said, they had told me that the lobbyist had said, now, I just want you to know his name isn't going to be on it because that just doesn't happen that often. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, if we can just get the law passed, I'll be fine. Yeah. And he called me and said, no, they're insisting that Christian's name be on it. I mean, and so it was them that I had reconciled myself to his name wouldn't be on it. Yeah. And so, I think Nick Bain, the representative from Oxford, he had really said, no, his name deserves to be on this. And so
glad it was.
And, and even in getting that done, there were people calling and trying to put roadblocks.
Oh, I'm sure.
Into it being, and trying to say that we would impede investigations and we would whatever. Okay. And I mean, it was very specifically worded that law enforcement could have, I mean, any
they need
agencies.
Those,
It was just outside people.
Shouldn't be able to request those to be released.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And when was that officially passed?
It became effective July 1 of 2021.
Okay, so going on a year now. Mm-hmm. Wow. Congratulations to you guys. That is huge, and
it's that's a major win.
I mean, Christian would be really, really proud.
Well, I will have to say, I'd like to bring make this point that in today's world where Democrats and Republicans cannot agree on the color of the sky, it was.
Both sides.
It was 100%. Yeah. I mean, no one voted against it. And so it was an extremely bipartisan bill. And I think that says that people can come together.
Yeah.
And when there's some comment, and which I couldn't imagine anyone voting against it.
Right.
I mean, something like that. But I mean, there always is some, it becomes political, but it was 100% supported.
That's amazing. That's great to hear. I mean, you rarely hear anything like that these days.
All right, so I'm just going to go over some more, not recent developments, but just later developments from the timeline we've been talking about, just so that we have all the information out there. But as far as Dylan and Whitley go, this is just some of the updates on them. So Dylan was in and out of jail for unrelated charges after Christian's death. And while he was in jail, a tip came in from someone who was in jail with him. And the text said, quote unquote, D set some cat up for some money. He and another dude shot him and made it look like a suicide while his bitch was tripping on bars, but they fucked up and they couldn't get any money. Whitley was in Key West for a while, and she has, ever since all this has happened, she has absolutely not cooperated at all with any sort of investigation, whether it be with PIs or any other sort. And she's basically just been kind of off the map for a long time now. But there were actually 2 warrants for murder, but Dylan and Whitley were never arrested because those warrants weren't ever activated. When Christian died, the DA at the time was a man named Bilbo Mitchell. And Bilbo had been a DA for 30 years, and he had ran unopposed for those 30 years. He wanted to call a grand jury before arresting Dylan and Whitley on those warrants. The warrants eventually got canceled, and they put out new warrants for manslaughter by culpable negligence. And right before the grand jury was called, Bilbo recused himself from the investigation for having a personal connection to the case. And at that point, the case was handed off to the Attorney General's office for presentation. In 2017, a grand jury was convened to hear evidence in Christian's case, and they ended up not indicting either Whitley or Dylan. But it turns out that the grand jury didn't hear all of the evidence. 3 years after Christian died, Meridian Police Department Captain Jay Arrington looked through the case files, and he concluded that Christian was dead hours before Dylan called 911 and that the scene had been staged. Captain Arrington was actually the one who wrote the manslaughter by culpable homicide warrants that were never served. He also concluded that Christian's death was a homicide, but the grand jury never heard about his conclusions that he made, and he himself wasn't allowed to be at the proceedings. In 2018, Bilbo retired from his position as the DA and appointed his assistant, Cassie Coleman. He was in the middle of his term, so there was no normal election, and she was just sworn in. And Bilbo still worked with Cassie in some way at that time. So the Andreacchios tried to work with Cassie to try to, get the investigation reopened and present all of the evidence that they had collected through their private investigators, through all of the experts that they paid, the forensic pathologists, Knox and Associates, the crime scene reconstruction experts, among tons of other evidence that the Meridian Police Department also had, and bring that before a grand jury. But Cassie Coleman absolutely has refused because she's claiming that there is no new evidence to bring forward to the grand jury, because she claims to this day that the grand jury saw all of the evidence and that they decided not to indict Whitley or Dylan. So this kind of leads us to when we went out there. We went out there at a time when the Andreacchios actually got a candidate to run against Cassie Coleman, because again, nobody's run against the DA in Meridian. And that's when you guys got Michael Grace. And we got to meet Michael Grace, and we were actually there during the election, and it was very, very close race. And I mean, honestly, I'm very impressed at the campaign that you guys ran with Michael Grace and how close. And again, there's a lot of, we experienced firsthand the counting of the votes. There is definitely some sketchiness with all of that. We went up to different courthouses and different counties, and we kind of saw it all unfold firsthand with you guys. And that alone was just such an experience. And we never really got to catch up with you on sort of what happened after that. How did Michael sort of take everything afterwards, and where is he now, and what's he up to?
Initially there was some, I don't know the correct terminology now, I can't remember, but basically there was a call for a recount in some counties or in some areas, and they did that in certain boxes or whatever within a precinct. And then Michael, he said that he was going to accept the outcome of the election, and he still practices law, and he still does a lot in Clark County and Lauderdale County.
Okay.
So, I think it was a learning experience for all of us. It was my first time in any kind of politics, and it was his first time to run for an elected position. And you saw, and that was probably not the ideal situation for him to be in, because it was very contentious, a lot of hostility between both sides, and y'all were there that night and saw kind of the arrogance and the demeanor that we've dealt with for years. So, but she's got to run again. So next year's a new campaign, and we are very hopeful that there will be one, if not two, people running against her.
And that's great. Just to stop the cycle of running unopposed, I think is what has to happen. Because the thing is if a new DA comes in, that opens you guys up an opportunity to go to that new DA and actually make some progress, and not get the same excuse that you keep hearing over and over again, that until you bring me new evidence, I'm not gonna bring it to a grand jury or even consider it. And hopefully you might be able to progress, even though we're way beyond that at this point. Just having a new DA just for Lauderdale County and all the citizens that live there, I think is beneficial to everybody at that point. So
is Michael Grace considering maybe running again?
I don't think so. Okay. I do want to say, though, just so to make sure that they know that Cassie's now recused as of March of 2021. So she can't have anything to do with it now. Right. That was something that she brought, she filed a motion to be recused. So yes, unless there's a new DA, her DA, as long as it's under her jurisdiction, she cannot try the case or present it to a grand jury.
Right. How do you guys feel about her being recused, or how did you feel at the time?
We were very happy. I don't know why she didn't do it way before then.
Right.
Because I've always thought that Cassie played this whole thing wrong.
And very personal.
Right. If she had, when she was first appointed, just met with us and sat down and said, hey, I hear your concerns. I mean, even quite frankly, if she had not even done anything, but she had kind of strung us along, but she wouldn't. I mean, it was just kind of like, nope, not going to do it, not, you know, and then became very personal with it, and you know, both sides became very and so we, of course, she and I do not have a very good relationship at all, and she, you know, thinks that we have caused her to be a target and a victim, and you know, I feel like if you're a female DA in a male-dominated position, you don't need to look like you're, you know, scared of me, who's never. I'm not out, you know, gang banging on the weekends or anything.
She's brought a lot of this on herself, just with her handling of it.
So let's sort of talk about where things are at now, and obviously, like we just said, Cassie's recused herself, and now let's talk about the special prosecutor and the Attorney General's office, and kind of, you took this all the way to the top as far as the government goes in Mississippi, and now you're waiting for the Attorney General's office to appoint a special prosecutor to take Christian's case and take it to a grand jury. Is that correct?
Right. In March of 2021, there was a hearing, you know, with a judge, and Cassie recused herself. He agreed to that. He said that, you know, and Cassie said a special prosecutor needed to be appointed. The Attorney General's office had a representative there in court. They agreed a special prosecutor needed to be appointed. You know, I think everybody agreed that there was evidence that was never shown to the grand jury. And so because of Cassie being recused, the DA was out of the picture. So the judge appointed the Attorney General's office, even though they asked to be recused also. They said that they had a conflict of interest because Bilbo worked for them, Gypsy, the investigator, worked for them, and because of some legal issues. The judge said, no, y'all have enough attorneys there. You can appoint an attorney that, you know, I think they call it a Chinese wall, where he doesn't communicate about the case. They took it to the Supreme Court, the Mississippi Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled the judge and said, you know, they're right. You don't have the authority to make them be the special prosecutor. He didn't say they didn't need to be a special prosecutor. They just said you can't make them be the special prosecutor. So now we're just kind of sitting here with everybody saying, you know, well, I can't do it because I'm recused, and the judge hasn't appointed anybody. So it still sits in the Attorney General's lap for responsibility of appointing. I mean, if they feel like they have a conflict of interest, they can appoint an outside prosecutor, and they can be the special prosecutor. So it still is, the ball's in their court.
Yeah, no, and just not only that, I'm just thinking, so there's the last sort of media coverage of this case was the 48 Hours episode, and we'll link that as well, because I think that's worth watching, because Cassie Coleman, the current DA, she claims in the documentary that in the episode that they brought all of the evidence, because to be fair, the other side is saying that this case has been looked at by multiple agencies, the FBI, it's gone all the way up to the Attorney General's office at special, you know, there's been tons of investigators looking at this, and they're all these agencies are saying that this is a suicide. But that's based upon, you know, who knows what they're basing that on, right? Because there's a lot of evidence that hasn't been looked at, it hasn't been presented to the grand jury. So, you know, why not let the grand jury take a look at all the evidence and make the decision on whether or not someone should be indicted for whether this is a homicide, or, you know, if it's not, then a suicide. And that's what you guys are ultimately wanting. You just want a grand jury. You want a fair chance at all of the evidence being presented to a grand jury. And in the episode, they actually tracked down a juror from the original the first grand jury that they did, and they said straight up that they were not presented all of this other evidence, and that it was not what Cassie said happened in fact. And so clearly there's discrepancy there, and clearly there's just so much deception. And I think that's one of the biggest things for you guys is, like, you want the truth. You want the truth of what happened. You want to know, you know, you want all of this evidence looked at. You want
shot at justice.
Right, and a fair shot at justice. And in order to do that, this is the way our system is set up. So we need to have this put in front of a grand jury so that people that have no attachment, no personal connection to the case can look at it and determine whether or not this should be tried or not. And I think that at the very least is absolutely deserving. I mean, I just can't imagine how you feel about this and how hard it's been just to get to that point. And that's what you're fighting for, is just getting this to a grand jury so that it can be looked at fairly, and whether it goes to trial or not. I mean, what would be your opinion? I mean, I don't know how it wouldn't, bring indictments, because I mean, there's just so much here, and there's so much deception and lying, and there's been so many, honestly, cover up and just
so much evidence,
people protecting each other. It's just it's honestly a case unlike any other. I mean, I know we haven't looked at any case that has even remotely this level of not only just deception, incompetence, corruption, but just there's clearly more going on, and it needs to be, all of it needs to be uncovered and looked at. And I think that's what you're looking for. I mean,
we just want to know that all the evidence was presented, everything. I mean, show them the text messages, show them whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But everything is presented, and let them, make a decision. Oh. And again, yes, I feel confident that there would be indictments, just because, I mean, that doesn't mean they get a guilty verdict. It just means that there needs to be further investigation, and it needs to go to a trial where everybody can put out, their evidence. That's all we've ever wanted, is just to feel like that all the evidence was looked at, and all of it was seriously considered, and not just an excuse made to explain away something.
Right, or protect their own interests in this. And that's the most difficult thing, is so many people have so much to protect, and to, they don't want, that's the thing is, and what we kind of came back from our trip down there was like, if they unpack this, then how much more do they have to look into? How many more cases out there have been botched, or just have corruption running through them that people are going to want to look at? And what's the chain reaction of events that are going to happen? And I feel like that's what those at the top are trying to prevent, is that this is going to open up a big box of.
Well, I mean, it would make me as a family member in that area wonder about my family members who went to grand jury and either was found guilty or not guilty. Maybe they were found guilty and they shouldn't have been found guilty, or I say guilty, indicted. I just feel like I don't sit here and think that Christian's case was he had this special importance to these people that they made all these, dug this hole for themselves. I mean, I'm sure it goes on all the time, and to such a degree that to them it's no big deal, and they didn't think that they would get caught. I mean, like we talked about earlier, most people don't find out what's presented to a grand jury because that case file isn't released.
Right.
And they have proven the point that anybody can get indicted or not indicted. It's dependent on who is presenting the evidence. Right. If they want to skew it one way or the other, they can. And nobody knows anything about it because the jurors don't know any better. And
they're just
the family is not present. And it's supposed to be a closed proceeding and secret. So how many times does this happen? All the time.
Right. Yeah. And we have hard proof now that's in fact what happened. Like, that's the latest, is we know for sure that the evidence was not presented and it was skewed heavily one way. And so that's all you're asking for, is a fair shot at a trial, and for jurors to look at the whole case.
Do you feel like that day could be coming soon?
I do. I think that we're closer to it than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And I definitely do.
So one thing that we're going to ask of you is, we'll have in the description and show notes for the episode, we'll have, of course, the Justice for Christian Facebook page. We'll also have your website, and we'll also have the information for the Attorney General's office in Mississippi.
Yes.
And, we're waiting on them at this point, right? We're waiting for them to figure out the special prosecutor situation.
So any more pressure we can put on them, the better. I mean, that will make, I think, a huge difference. So we know that you guys are super active, with whoever we've brought on our show. We've seen excellent results when we've asked you to contact whoever. And in this case, we definitely need some more pressure.
Yeah, in which there's a way to go about doing this. There's a way that it
not
actually gets taken seriously versus just, we don't want it to be a harassing type of thing. It's more of
We'll have a good example below in the description box or our show notes of how best to go about contacting. Also, I know a lot of people were curious about the petition that we ran. We got, I don't remember how many signatures we ended up with at this point, but I know we hit the goal, which was 100,000. And according to the White House website, someone has to respond if you've hit this goal. And no one ever did, which isn't completely shocking considering how much of a mess everything is right now. But yeah, nothing ever came out of that, which is incredibly frustrating, but we're not giving up. And if you would like to, take that action and contact, that's very helpful, but also just following the Facebook page, which, there's truly an army behind Christian at this point. It's someone's always on there and monitoring it, and it's really like a community. Yeah, that's huge for a justice page. So definitely check that out, join in and follow this journey because it is far from over. I know you guys are not going to give up, as many people have told you, give up, get over it, move on. It's just never going to happen. It's completely unrealistic for anyone to ask that of you. And now you've, like you said earlier, you've put in 8 years of work into this case. And I don't see you guys slowing down ever. So
no, if it means you just have to learn a lot of patience.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it is political and you have to wait for another person to be elected, which of course comes around every 4 years or whatever. Right. But we can wait. We're not going anywhere.
Nope.
And it's your fight for justice for Christian has magnified, it's helping, not only looking for justice for your son, but you're potentially going to help countless others because I really truly believe that if this actually goes to trial, that this is going to be groundbreaking for especially Meridian, but just for the whole state in general, and just the things that could potentially be unpacked and revealed. And potentially people losing their jobs, potentially other people who may have done things that they weren't supposed to do or covered up things. And there's articles of Meridian police officers getting indicted for corruption charges recently. And there's obviously a lot there, that needs to be investigated and changed. There's just big changes that need to happen for the whole community as a whole. And I think the fact that you may not have meant to lead the charge with that, the fact that you really are at this point, and you're just doing such an amazing job at it. And you're not letting anybody stop you, no matter what people say to you and the horrific things people have done to you. It's just, you're truly an inspiration for everybody, and for us, and for all those out there that are fighting for justice and fighting the system, and no matter how broken it is, never giving up hope that, all it takes is that one person or that one, law to be passed and things can start moving. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming on our show. It's great to see you. It's been, I can't believe it's already been a couple of years. I know.
We made that wild ride.
I know.
In the middle of the night to Kemper County.
Kemper County,
man. Mississippi.
That was a wild time. I will never forget that car ride.
I kept apologizing for Chris. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry. And you kept saying, don't worry about it. He's used to it.
We love Uncle Chris. Big fans
once in a lifetime experience for sure. That was.
It was.
Just your whole family. You guys are amazing people, and
we felt so welcome and
welcoming us into your home. Complete strange. We're like, oh yeah, we're YouTubers. Yeah, we want to make this. You're our first, family we've ever done this kind of video with, and honestly, I'm super proud of it. We're both. I watch it all the time still, and I'm just like, this is what it's all about, and it really has instilled this passion and fire in us to keep going and try to help others and do more of that in the future. And, because there's so many other people and families out there that need the same type of help, and just being able to help in some type of way, just, it makes doing this all the worthwhile. Like, it's not, for us, it's about the actual real life changes that happen as a result of covering this and
this.
covering cases and diving into this. And, that's why we're in it. And I'm so glad that we got the chance to meet you and work with you and your family. So.
Well, I think that y'all, like we discussed earlier, just give families a voice that don't feel like anybody's listening. And, y'all do have a large platform. And so you can reach so many people. And sometimes it's just the person who contacts you over Facebook and says, hey, I watched Kendall Rae's 801. And, you can be having a bad day and you get that message. Right. Or you are like, are we ever going to get anywhere with this? And you get a message like that from a total stranger.
Yeah.
From wherever. And so, I think that y'all too should be applauded for everything, all the voices that y'all give to people, because, I know y'all haven't been there, and I hope you've never are on this side of things. Yeah. But you do feel like nobody's listening. And so y'all are a way to at least feel like somebody's listening to you.
That's the least we can do, then we're more than happy to do that. So
yeah. And also just to people out there, I think just hearing what you said, it makes such a difference to reach out to a family, to send a message, to follow, even if they don't have time to respond. That goes a long way, much more than people realize, that can keep them going when you start to feel hopeless. I think it's really amazing, the internet these days. I mean, there's so many bad things about the internet too, but to see a community like this that you've built and how many people it's brought together, how many people have made friends. I mean, you have a friend here today. You guys are going to a concert tonight that you've met, through the internet. Right. And it's just really cool to see what you guys have done. I think you're huge role models to other families out there that could be in similar situations, and just kind of setting the blueprint for others in the future.
Well, I would encourage anybody that is going through something like this to do a support page. Like we have Justice for Christian, a support page, because, number one, they can do all kinds of things. I mean, I have people who send me, I saw this person and they're working here, or they're living here. I mean, some total stranger that but it's not just that, it is the support. It is knowing. And I mean, Justice for Christian we have our flaws sometimes as a group. But they've provided Christmas 2 years in a row, the members of Justice for Christian, for, 60 kids one Christmas and 45 kids last Christmas. Oh, wow. And donated gifts, and because of COVID that couldn't go on pass with family. So, they have banded together and taken on causes outside of.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. So.
Wow. That's really cool to hear. Well, you are always welcome on our show. Yes. Seriously. I mean, if there's any updates or anything we can do ever, of course, even if it's as simple as a retweet or sharing something, that we're here. And, we have faith that there will be justice for Christian one day.
Absolutely.
Well, thank y'all.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And we'll go ahead and wrap up there. But thank you guys for hanging in there with us for this one. I know we covered a lot of stuff. And again, if you're looking for more information, check out Apartment 801 Part 1 and 2. We'll have everything linked. Also, Culpable, great resource. Justice for Christian, and all the other links will be in the show notes and description box. But we will see you guys next time.